You've been told your whole life that control is the key. Control your future, control your career, control your relationships. But if control were truly the answer, then why do you still feel exhausted, anxious, and never at peace? Why is it that even when things appear to go your way, fear creeps back in, whispering that it could all collapse tomorrow? The truth is, no one ever told you that control is an illusion, and the tighter you cling to it, the more life slips through your fingers like grains of sand. But what if you no longer had to fight? What if letting go didn't mean losing, but finally gaining your freedom? For thousands of years, Buddhism has carried a quiet, yet powerful message. Peace is not found in controlling the universe. It is found in trusting it. The greatest masters, Zen monks, wandering sages, compassionate teachers, discovered how to live with lightness, calm, and genuine freedom. They learned to let go of fear, to stop wrestling with life, and to flow with it instead. And as you hear these lessons tonight, something within you will begin to shift. The storm in your mind will start to settle. The weight of what if will slowly lift, and you'll sense the freedom of no longer needing every answer, of realizing that the universe itself is holding you. This isn't just philosophy, it's transformation. By the end, you'll feel less like you are pushing against life, and more like you are being carried by it, gently and effortlessly, like a river. Are you ready to release control? Are you ready to finally trust the universe? If so, let us begin. You've just stepped through the door to something very few ever dare to face. The possibility that the peace you've been searching for lies not in holding tighter, but in loosening your grip. There is a quiet strength hidden within surrender, a subtle wisdom that whispers to those who are willing to listen. And if you allow yourself to step into it, what unfolds is not weakness, not passivity, but freedom. This is where we begin the subtle art of non-inference. From an early age, most of us are conditioned to believe that life must be managed, controlled, and shaped by sheer effort. Success is measured by how much we can dominate outcomes and bend reality to meet our expectations. Yet no matter how carefully we plan, the universe moves to its own rhythm. Traffic appears when least expected. Storms arrive on days we wished for sunshine. Endings come when we believed something would last forever. Our interference, our endless attempts to force life into our mold, becomes not only exhausting, but also a barrier that prevents us from seeing what is already unfolding. Non-inference does not mean indifference, nor does it mean neglect. It is the delicate art of knowing when action is wise, and when action is merely an expression of fear. It is the practice of allowing conditions, causes, and timing to move in their own natural way, without us clawing at them in desperation. This is what the Buddha described as letting things arise and pass away in their own time. It is not laziness, but it is the deep understanding that just as you cannot open a flower by tugging at its petals, you cannot rush life into bloom by meddling with it. The difficulty lies in the mind's addiction to control. The ego thrives on the illusion that it is the master conductor of all events. When things go wrong, it seeks someone to blame, whether it's self or others. When things go right, it takes the credit. But if you look closer, you'll see that every outcome you've ever known has been the result of countless conditions far beyond your reach. Your birth, the weather, the economy, the mood of another person, even the hidden chain of choices stretching back through centuries. Non-inference is not a withdrawal from responsibility, but rather a profound recognition of interdependence. Think of water. It does not argue with rocks, yet over time it shapes vast canyons. It does not resist gravity, yet it always finds its way to the ocean. Non-inference is living with that same quiet persistence, choosing not to obstruct what is flowing, not to manipulate what is naturally arranging itself, but to act in harmony with conditions. When you stop meddling, you begin to notice that much of life functions perfectly well without your constant management. The heart beats, the breath rises and falls, the seasons turn, all without your control. Peace begins where interference ends. At its core, interference is born of fear, fear that if we do not push, things will not happen, or worse, they will happen in ways that hurt us. Yet here lies the paradox. The more we interfere, the more tangled things become. Have you ever tried to solve a problem in haste, only to create three more? That is interference. Have you ever tried to control the choices of someone you love, only to drive them further away? That too is interference. When you release this habit, you allow natural intelligence to surface, the intelligence of causes and conditions working together in ways far beyond your limited view. In Buddhist practice, non-inference is cultivated through mindfulness, watching the mind when it wants to jump in, to fix, to grasp, and instead allowing that urge to dissolve. That letting go is the training of freedom. In daily life, this practice looks like pausing before reacting, breathing before deciding, listening instead of interrupting. Non-inference is not the absence of action, but the presence of awareness that discerns when action is skillful and when restraint is wise. The Buddha described this as skillful means, the ability to respond appropriately rather than compulsively. Consider a farmer. He tills the soil, plants the seed, waters the field. He does his part, but he cannot force the seed to sprout, nor can he drag the sun across the sky. If he meddles, digging into the soil each day to check on the seed, he destroys the very thing he wished to nurture. His wisdom lies in non-inference, in knowing when he has done enough and when nature must take its course. Life is no different. We can prepare, cultivate and act with care, but there always comes a point when we must step back, for the harvest belongs to the unfolding of conditions, not to our restless hands. This same wisdom extends to our relationship. How often do we interfere in the lives of those we love, convinced we know what is best for them? Parents dictate their children's choices long after they have grown. Friends try to fix problems that were never theirs to fix. Lovers attempt to mold each other into images of perfection. Yet the more we interfere, the more we suffocate. To love deeply is to allow space. To support is to trust that others have their own path. Non-inference here means respecting freedom and believing that the wisdom of another's journey will guide them more surely than our fears ever could. In meditation, this lesson reveals itself with striking clarity. The beginner tries to interfere with the mind, forcing it to be still, demanding it to be silent, but the more they struggle, the noisier it becomes. The advanced practitioner, however, learns the subtle art of simply observing thoughts arise and fade, sensations come and go, and in that effortless watching, the mind begins to settle on its own. No interference is needed, for awareness itself is enough. In this way, meditation becomes a training ground for life, a practice of letting things be as they are without grasping at them or pushing them away. There is a freedom that emerges only when you stop demanding that life obey your timetable. Imagine the relief of waking up without needing to control how the day unfolds. You still act, you still choose, but you are no longer chained to outcomes. This creates a profound shift. Effort becomes lighter, relationships become more honest, and challenges lose their threatening edge. Non-inference opens the doorway to trust. Not blind trust, but a deep confidence that life carries an intelligence greater than your carefully laid plans. And what happens when you live this way? Anxiety softens, decisions become clearer, and suddenly you begin noticing the small miracles that control once blinded you to the way help arrives unexpectedly, the way problems dissolve without force, the way opportunities appear naturally when you stop chasing. Non-inference creates space for the universe to breathe through you, and in that space, peace quietly arises. Of course, it takes courage to stop interfering, because the mind will warn you that it's reckless, that everything will collapse without your grip. Yet when you dare to let go, you realize that life has always been holding you. Non-inference is not retreat, but strength in its purest form. It is the choice to align with reality, rather than struggle against it. The Buddha's words echo this truth: let go, and you will know freedom. To begin practicing this, start small. Notice the urge to correct, to argue, to force your will upon others or situations. Pause instead, let silence speak. Allow time to pass before reacting. Little by little, you train yourself to step back and witness the intelligence of unfolding events. Over time, this becomes natural, and you find yourself less entangled, less burdened, more at ease. The subtle art of non-inference is not a single act, but a lifelong practice, one that deepens every day. And as you begin to release the urge to interfere, a deeper truth quietly surfaces. The very reason interference feels so urgent is because we fear change. We try to control because we dread loss, because we resist the shifting ground beneath our feet. Yet within the heart of Buddhist teaching lies a radical message. Change is not your enemy, it is the essence of freedom. To see impermanence not as a thief, but as a guide, transforms your entire relationship with life. Impermanence is often misunderstood as something tragic, a reminder that all things will eventually slip away. But that is only half the truth. The other half is luminous, because everything changes, nothing is fixed forever. Suffering passes, pain softens, and failure opens the doorway to new beginnings. Without impermanence, growth would be impossible, healing would never arrive, and joy could not follow sorrow. To embrace impermanence is to recognize that every moment carries within it the seed of renewal. Look at the seasons, and you will see this clearly. The tree that loses its leaves in autumn does not despair, does not cling to its old growth, trying to glue each leaf back into place. It stands bare through the winter, trusting that spring will bring new life. And if the tree were to fight to keep its leaves, it would never flower again. You are not so different. Holding on to what has already lived its life only prevents you from experiencing what is waiting, quietly, patiently, to bloom next. In relationships, impermanence offers its most tender lesson. Friendships evolve, children grow, lovers change, and the instinct is often to grasp at what once was, to preserve a fleeting moment of closeness, youth, or intimacy. Yet when you soften into the truth of change, you begin to see love itself through a new lens. It becomes less about possession and more about appreciation, less about holding on and more about treasuring what is here while it lasts. To love with the awareness of impermanence is to cherish fully without clinging when the form of the relationship inevitably shifts. This kind of love runs deeper because it flows with reality rather than against it. In your inner life, impermanence acts as a metaphor. Every state of mind, no matter how heavy, is destined to change. Anger flares but eventually subsides. Anxiety may grip tightly, but it cannot stay forever. Even grief, which feels eternal in its darkest hours, softens with time, sometimes even transforming into compassion. To know this is liberation, because you stop believing that today's emotions define you. Instead, you recognize them as passing weather in the sky of your mind. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering, and clinging is nothing more than the refusal to accept impermanence. We cling to youth, possessions, identities, and fixed ideas of how life should unfold. And when change inevitably arrives, we suffer. But when you turn toward impermanence and say yes, something shifts. Suffering loosens its grip, and you discover that the very thing you feared, change, is what makes life precious. If everything lasted forever, nothing would matter. It is precisely because the flower wilts that its beauty pierces the heart. It is because the child grows that every moment of play carries meaning. Impermanence does not steal. It gives urgency to love, depth to joy, and softness to sorrow. This truth also reshapes how you approach goals and ambitions. Many hesitate to take risks for fear of failure, yet impermanence reminds you that failure itself is not final. The job lost, the dream that dissolved, the plan that collapsed, none of this mark the end. They are simply forms that arose and passed, clearing space for new possibilities. With impermanence as your guide, you move with courage, knowing nothing defines you permanently, and renewal is always possible. Impermanence also frees you from regret. The past, which we replay endlessly wishing it had unfolded differently, is itself impermanent. It exists only in memory, shifting and fading with time. What remains is the present moment, fresh, alive, and waiting. When you release the illusion that you could preserve or rewrite the past, you discover the freedom of what is here now. You carry the lessons, but let the weight dissolve. There is also profound freedom in recognizing the impermanence of identity. You are not a fixed self carved in stone, but a fluid, ever-changing process of thoughts, experiences, choices, and influences. Who you were 5 years ago is not who you are today, and who you are today will not be who you are tomorrow. To cling to an old identity is to live in a cage that no longer fits, while to accept impermanence in yourself is to allow growth, to permit reinvention, and to welcome the possibility of becoming more than you once imagined. Even your body teaches impermanence daily. Cells die and regenerate, hair turns gray, muscles weaken, strengthen, and weaken again. To resist this natural rhythm is to suffer endlessly, clinging to youth or health as though they were permanent, when in truth they too are part of life's flowing river. But to accept impermanence is to live with gratitude. Instead of mourning every wrinkle, you can honor the years that gave it. Instead of fearing decline, you can celebrate the body's resilience and adapt gracefully to its changes. This acceptance does not make you passive. It makes you free to care for your body with love, not fear. Impermanence also transforms your relationship with death, the ultimate change, the one most people avoid thinking about, yet the very doorway Buddhism points to again and again. Death is not the destruction of life, but the continuation of impermanence. Every breath is a reminder. The inhale arises, the exhale passes, and in the same way, life arises and life passes. When you live with this awareness, fear begins to soften. You cherish time more deeply. You speak words you truly mean. You stop postponing joy for some imagined future. The knowledge of death makes life luminous. To see impermanence as liberation is also to awaken compassion. When you understand that everyone is subject to change, you become gentler. The person who hurt you is not fixed in that act. They too are changing, growing, stumbling and learning. The suffering they caused may pass just as your anger may. From this perspective, forgiveness emerges naturally, not as a forced effort, but as a recognition of the fluid nature of being human. In daily practice, you can cultivate awareness of impermanence in simple ways. Notice the steam rising from your tea and dissolving into air. Watch clouds drift and scatter across the sky. Pay attention to the way sound arises and vanishes, leaving silence behind. These are not trivial observations. They are training for the mind to accept the fleeting nature of all things. And the more you see it, the more natural it becomes to let go when life asks you to release. Impermanence also teaches resilience. When you understand that no state lasts forever, you stop collapsing under the weight of difficulty. Hardship becomes a visitor, not a permanent resident. Joy becomes a guest, to welcome fully, knowing it too will leave. This rhythm does not diminish happiness, it intensifies it. You savor what is here, precisely because you know it is temporary, and that awareness turns ordinary moments into treasures. When you embrace impermanence fully, you begin to see the futility of resistance. So much of human pain comes from trying to hold back the tide, from attempting to freeze moments or fight the natural flow of life. But the tide does not ask your permission. It comes and it goes. To stand rigid against it is to be broken. To flow with it is to be carried. Non-inference and impermanence are two sides of the same truth. The universe moves, and peace comes when you allow yourself to move with it. This is not a philosophy meant only for monks or sages. It is a practical doorway to freedom for anyone willing to see clearly. Each time you practice letting go, each time you accept change without clinging, you strengthen your capacity to live lightly. And in living lightly, you discover a joy that no permanence could ever give. The fear of impermanence turns into reverence when you realize it is the very reason anything matters at all. To fear change is to miss the beauty of the fleeting. To embrace it is to finally. This is the liberation the Buddha pointed to, a life unburdened by clinging, open to the endless dance of arising and passing, filled with gratitude for each precious breath. And when the truth of impermanence begins to settle in your heart, another question naturally arises. If everything is changing, if nothing is fixed, then how should you live? Should you simply drift wherever life takes you, or should you push with all your strength to shape the future? The Buddha's answer was neither extreme. He offered something more subtle, a way of effort that is neither rigid nor careless, a balance between discipline and surrender. This is the middle way of effort, a path that allows you to act with clarity and energy without becoming trapped in strain or passivity. Most of us live swinging between two extremes. On one side, the endless pressure to strive, achieve, and control every outcome. On the other, the temptation of neglect. The temptation to give up, to abandon responsibility, to let laziness rule, is as dangerous as the relentless drive to force outcomes, for both lead to suffering. Forcing drains your spirit, leaves you anxious, and ties your worth to results, while neglect leaves you stagnant, dissatisfied, and weak. The middle way is neither of these extremes, but rather a rhythm of action that feels alive but not tense, purposeful but not desperate, steady but not rigid. In Buddhist teaching, this balance is compared to tuning the strings of a lute. If the string is pulled too tight, it snaps, but if it is left too loose, it makes no sound, and only when the tension is balanced does music arise. Your effort is the same. Too much strain breaks you, too little care dulls you, but the middle tension, the balanced effort, produces harmony and life. To live this way requires sensitivity, the ability to listen to yourself deeply, to know when to lean forward and when to step back. Effort in the Buddhist sense is not about raw intensity, but about skill, and this is what is called right effort, the kind of energy that supports clarity and compassion, rather than ego and greed. This means cultivating what nourishes the mind and letting go of what drags it down, not simply working hard, but working wisely. The middle way of effort asks you to be mindful of the quality of your actions, to see whether they are guided by fear, by pride, by craving, or whether they come from steadiness and kindness. Discipline plays an important role here, but discipline in this sense is not about harshness or punishment. It is about consistency, the quiet commitment to what matters most. Discipline without forcing is like tending a fire. You feed it regularly with care, not with panic. You do not smother it with too much wood, nor do you neglect it until it dies. You keep it alive with patience, letting it grow at its own pace. This kind of discipline does not chain you, but frees you, giving shape to your days without crushing your spirit. Surrender is the other half of the balance. But surrender here is not about giving up. It is about letting go of the illusion that you control all results. You act with effort, but you release the need to dictate the outcome, and this protects you from despair when things don't unfold as planned, while also shielding you from arrogance when they do. Surrender means you plant the seed, water the soil, but do not demand the flower to bloom on your schedule. You trust the process, knowing that effort and conditions together give rise to fruit. This balance reveals itself clearly in meditation, where a beginner often tries too hard, straining to focus and fighting against thoughts until the mind becomes tight, restless, and discouraged, while others fall into the opposite trap of drifting into daydreams, making no effort to stay present. Both extremes are unhelpful, while the middle way in meditation is alert but relaxed, focused, yet open. You sit upright with dignity, but soften your grip, and your attention remains steady but gentle, like holding a bird in your hands, not so tight that you crush it, not so loose that it flies away. In daily life, this balance of effort is what prevents burnout. Many people throw themselves into work or personal goals with relentless intensity, only to collapse from exhaustion or emptiness, while others avoid effort altogether, waiting for life to deliver meaning without contribution, only to end up feeling directionless. The middle way allows you to engage fully while also resting fully, giving your best in each task, but releasing it once it is complete, learning the wisdom of cycles, work and rest, activity and stillness, effort. This balanced effort also reshapes your relationship with ambition. You can still pursue goals, but you no longer chain your worth to them. You set intentions and move toward them with steady steps, but you do not crush yourself with pressure or self-criticism along the way, allowing ambition to become a path of growth rather than a prison of perfectionism. Success is measured not only by the outcome, but by the quality of the effort itself, whether it was honest, compassionate, and balanced. The middle way of effort also teaches patience, for forcing is rooted in impatience, the craving for immediate results, while neglect is rooted in hopelessness, the belief that nothing is worth trying. Balanced effort trusts the long arc of change, knowing that progress often unfolds slowly like water carving stone, valuing steady practice over dramatic bursts, and seeing each small step as meaningful, each day of honest effort as a victory, regardless of how visible the results may be. In relationships, balanced effort shows up as presence. Forcing looks like trying to control others, demanding affection, or clinging to unrealistic expectations, while neglect looks like indifference, withdrawal, or lack of care. The middle way, however, is attentive without suffocating, loving without trying to own, practicing the effort of listening deeply, showing up consistently, and giving space when needed. This kind of effort creates trust and allows love to grow naturally, rather than through pressure. On the path of spiritual practice, balanced effort protects you from discouragement, for there will be days when your mind feels dull, when meditation seems impossible, when compassion feels far away. Forcing yourself with harsh judgment only deepens frustration, while neglecting the practice leaves you drifting in confusion. Balanced effort becomes the quiet voice that says, keep going gently, the willingness to return again and again without anger at yourself, without resignation, but with steady faith that each return matters. This way of effort reveals something profound about freedom. For many believe freedom means the absence of effort, but Buddhism teaches that true freedom is found in right effort, when your actions are aligned with wisdom and compassion, when they are free from forcing and neglect. Effort itself becomes joyful. It no longer feels like struggle, but like flow, and your energy becomes an expression of your deepest values, with each act strengthening rather than draining. Balance also brings clarity in decision-making, as forcing decisions leads to haste and regret, while neglecting them leaves you stuck in avoid. Balanced effort listens carefully, considers wisely, and then acts with confidence, accepting whatever comes, honoring both reason and intuition, responsibility and surrender, allowing you to live with fewer regrets, because your choices are grounded in presence, not panic or apathy. In the body too, you can sense the wisdom of balanced effort, for overexertion leads to injury, exhaustion, or illness, while underuse leads to weakness and decay. The middle path in physical effort is steady care, movement, nourishment, and rest, all balanced, training strength without punishing yourself, and honoring limits without letting comfort become a cage. This harmony between effort and ease creates vitality that lasts, rather than peaks that collapse, and balanced effort even shapes how you respond to challenges. Forcing tries to crush obstacles with aggression, while neglect avoids them altogether, but the middle way engages challenges with resilience, meeting them directly, using creativity and patience without the desperation to control every detail. This approach often reveals solutions that forcing would miss, and strength that neglect would never discover. Ultimately, the middle way of effort is a practice of trust. Trust in yourself that you can give your best without breaking yourself. Trust in life that your steady actions will bear fruit, in their own time, and trust in the path that balance leads to wisdom. This trust allows you to walk with dignity through change and uncertainty, knowing that each step matters not because it guarantees a specific outcome, but because it aligns you with truth. To live in this way is to feel a new kind of strength, calm, steady, unshakable. You act with purpose, but without strain. You rest without guilt. You move forward without fear. Discipline and surrender no longer feel like opposites, but like partners in a dance, each completing the other. And this is the art of effort that does not wound, but heals, that does not enslave, but liberates, that does not cling, but flows. From this balance, the journey into patience, karma, and the deeper unfolding of trust continues naturally. When balancing effort becomes part of you, another challenge quietly reveals itself. You may give your best with calm steadiness, but a voice in the mind still whispers, when will the results appear? Why haven't things turned out yet? This restless need for outcomes is one of the deepest knots we carry, and the Buddha pointed to a truth that cuts through this struggle. Plant the seed, but do not claim ownership of the harvest. Patience with karma is not passive waiting. It is a form of wisdom that frees you from chains of expectation and disappointment. Karma is not a cosmic punishment system, nor is it a guarantee of reward. It is the natural unfolding of causes and conditions, the law of seed and fruit. Every action you take plants something in the soil of existence, and sometimes the fruit comes quickly, sometimes it ripens after years, and sometimes it appears in ways you never expected. To demand that results show up on your timeline is like standing in a field, shouting at sprouts to break through the earth. The seed does not obey impatience, it follows its nature, and your role is to nurture, not to control. This patience requires trust, and trust grows through understanding. Think of the smallest act of kindness, a smile to a stranger, a word of comfort, a moment of generosity. You may never know how far that ripple travels. Perhaps the stranger carries that warmth into their day, treating another with kindness, who then passes it forward again. The chain of effects spreads far beyond what your eyes can trace, and to insist on measuring it, to demand immediate confirmation, is to miss the vastness of interconnection. Karmic patience allows you to act without needing proof, because you trust the invisible web of causes to carry your action forward. The absence of patience turns life into frustration. You donate but expect praise. You help but expect gratitude. You work but demand recognition. And when these expectations are not met, bitterness arises, and the joy of the act is poisoned. Karmic patience teaches that the value lies in the act itself, not in the applause or reward. And when you release ownership of the harvest, generosity becomes light, service becomes joyful, and work becomes fulfilling, regardless of outcome. The act itself completes itself in that moment, and this freedom is profound, carrying within it a timeless lesson about patience and the nature of karma. Karma does not obey the structure of your calendar, for conditions ripen in their own time, not according to your will. Sometimes you plant in spring and taste fruit in summer, yet at other times the tree takes years before it offers shade. Your task is not to rush the process, but to tend the soil, water the roots, and protect the growth without demanding speed. In this way, patience is not passive idleness, but active care without obsession. It is the strength to keep planting even when the field looks empty, trusting that life always stirs beneath the surface. Karmic patience shields you from despair when hardship weighs heavily upon you, for in those moments the mind often cries, "Why me?" Yet when you look through the lens of karma, you realize that every moment is the flowering of many seeds, some planted by you, some by others, and many by countless causes, stretching far beyond what you can understand. This perspective does not condemn or blame, but instead empowers, reminding you that each choice now is another seed, another direction for the future, and even in suffering you are planting. Patience grants you the strength to endure the winters of life, knowing that spring will come, that nothing remains frozen forever. One of the most liberating insights is realizing that you are not the sole owner of results. When good outcomes arise, They are never just the result of your seed, but also the rain, the sunlight, the soil, and the countless unseen hands that played their part. Such recognition softens pride and deepens gratitude. When difficult outcomes appear, they too are not solely your burden, but the collision of many conditions far beyond your control. These understanding eases guilt and releases you from the endless cycle of self-blame. With karmic patience, you learn to hold both success and failure lightly, knowing neither fully belongs to you. In relationships, patience transforms how you give love and care. Without it, love becomes transactional. If I give, I expect a return. With patience, however, love becomes unconditional, a gift freely offered. You give kindness, attention, and support, not to extract something in return, but because giving itself is beautiful. Sometimes that love blossoms quickly, sometimes after years, and sometimes not in the way you expected. Yet patience frees you from resentment, revealing the simple truth that love given is never wasted, because it shapes you in the very act of giving. Patience also nurtures humility, for though you may believe you know the best outcome, karma unfolds with a complexity far beyond your planning. Often what seemed like a setback later revealed itself as the perfect ground for growth, the job you lost making space for a deeper calling, the relationship that ended opening freedom to know yourself, the delay that frustrated you protecting you from a darker path. With patience, you no longer rush to label experiences as good or bad, success or failure, but instead learn to wait, to observe, and to trust that the meaning of a seed is not always visible at the time of planting. This patience calls for courage because it strips away the illusion of control, asking you to give your best and then step back into uncertainty. Yet it is precisely this uncertainty that gives life its depth and mystery, for if you always knew when and how results would unfold, the wonder of life would be lost. Karmic patience teaches you to embrace the unknown, to rest in the unfolding, to find beauty not only in the harvest, but also in the waiting itself, while revealing a profound connection between patience and compassion for yourself. Many people plant seeds of effort and then punish themselves for not seeing results quickly, turning practice into self-criticism and growth into judgment. Yet patience teaches that growth has its own natural pace. Just as no one would scold a child for not becoming an adult overnight, you need not scold yourself for not reaching perfection instantly. Patience allows you to nurture yourself as you would a garden, with care, persistence, and gentleness. The daily practice of karmic patience can be as simple as noticing where you cling to results. When you perform a good deed, observe the mind seeking acknowledgement. When you devote effort to a task, observe the impatience that arises. Instead of feeding it, smile at it, reminding yourself that the seed is planted and that your work is complete in this moment, for the rest belongs to life. Over time, this shift becomes natural, and your actions grow lighter, free from the weight of demand. Even the smallest habits transform under this perspective. A single breath taken with awareness is a seed. A moment of restraint instead of anger is a seed. A kind thought toward yourself is a seed. You may not see their fruit today, but trust that they accumulate, shaping your future like unseen roots, strengthening a tree. Karmic patience is faith in the invisible, the willingness to keep planting goodness without rushing to harvest. And this way of living changes how you see others as well. You stop rushing to judge someone's present state, because you know they too are in the middle of their own field of growth. Someone lost in anger may unknowingly be planting seeds of future wisdom. Someone in despair may be closer to transformation than it appears. Patience allows you to honor everyone's journey without demanding they ripen by your schedule. The greatest gift of karmic patience is freedom. When you no longer tie your joy to the timing of results, you are free to act from love, integrity, and truth. Your peace is not postponed until the harvest. It is alive in the planting itself. Meaning is found not only in what comes later, but in the act of giving now, and this makes your life steady, resilient, and full, for your happiness no longer depends on controlling outcomes. Through karmic patience, you learn that life is not a bargain, but a flow. You contribute, you nurture, you trust. The universe weaves your actions into patterns you may never see, yet they matter, and each seed planted with sincerity shapes the future, whether or not you are there to witness its fruit. To live in this way is to walk with open hands, to give without clinging, to serve without waiting for applause, for this is the patience that liberates, the patience that turns every moment of effort into an offering to the vast unfolding of life. As patience with karma softens your grasp on results, life itself begins to reveal patterns you cannot ignore, repeating lessons through struggles, losses, frustrations, and disappointment. At first, these repetitions feel like punishments, like being trapped in an endless cycle with no escape. But the Buddha offered a radical perspective. What if these cycles are not enemies but teach? What if the endless turning of samsara, the wheel of birth and death, joy and sorrow, success and failure, is itself the classroom where freedom is learned? Samsara is the restless current of existence, the continual arising and fading of experiences, the hunger that fuels desire, the dissatisfaction that follows every pleasure, and the suffering that clings to every loss. Many traditions describe samsara as something to fight against, but in Buddhism, it is seen as a mirror, every repetition reminding you that clinging leads to suffering, every cycle offering another chance to wake up, to see clearly, and to release control. Rather than fleeing from samsara, the true path is to learn from it. For frustration itself becomes one of the clearest teachers. Each time you crave something and do not receive it, or when you finally receive it, only to lose it again, the sting points to the undeniable truth. Nothing here can be fully held. The cycle repeats precisely because we resist the lesson. When frustration arises, patience and awareness reveal its deeper message, that control is not possible, and that clinging only deepens the wound. By learning to sit with frustration without demanding it disappear, you begin to soften around it, and it shows you where your expectations are rigid, where your attachments keep you bound. In this way, suffering itself becomes a teacher that does not lie. Pleasure can deceive by making you believe permanence is possible, but pain strips away illusions with ruthless honesty. When you lose someone you love, when a dream collapses, or when health falters, the raw truth of impermanence stands before you. It hurts, yet it teaches, revealing that freedom is never found in securing outcomes, but only in letting go. From this perspective, suffering is no longer an enemy to destroy, but a guide pointing you toward relief. Cycles of repetition in life, the same mistakes, the same arguments, the same disappointments, are samsara's most relentless lessons. At first, they feel like curses. You may ask, why does this keep happening? Why do I meet the same patterns in different forms? The Buddhist answer is simple, because the lesson has not yet been learned. Each repetition is life patiently pointing to the same place, saying, look here, release here, until the clinging is seen and let go. Samsara continues its turning. When the grasp is finally released, the cycle dissolves and the teacher's work is complete. Even joy in samsara carries its own teaching. The sweetness of a happy moment, the rush of success, the comfort of love. All of these too are impermanent. They rise and they pass. When clung to, their passing brings suffering, but when accepted as fleeting, they open the heart to gratitude. In this way, happiness itself becomes a lesson in letting go, reminding you that clinging even to beauty binds you. This shift in perspective also transforms the meaning of failure. Most people see failure as an enemy, as proof of weakness. But within the cycles of samsara, failure often proves to be the sharper teacher. Success can easily breed pride, blindness, and attachment, while failure exposes the fragility of control, humbles the ego, and reveals the futility of rigid grasping. Through failure, you come to learn resilience, compassion, and humility. Samsara teaches not by offering only sweetness, but by exposing the bitter truths that make freedom possible. The wheel of samsara does not turn only across lifetimes, but within the space of a single day. Moods rise and fall, thoughts appear and vanish, desires spark and fade. Every small cycle reflects the larger truth. By paying attention to these microcycles, you train yourself to see the pattern everywhere. A morning irritation passes, an afternoon joy fades, an evening worry dissolves. Each cycle whispers, nothing lasts. Let go. To ignore these whispers is to remain enslaved, but to hear them is to begin to learn. Samsara also teaches powerfully through relationships. The same conflicts return, the same wounds are triggered, the same disappointments replay again and again. These are not punishments from the outside, but mirrors showing what clinging still lives inside. A partner's anger, a friend's neglect, a colleague's betrayal. Each one reveals the attachments and expectations that bind you. The cycle repeats until awareness grows, until the lesson is received and the knot is loosened. In this way, samsara becomes not a prison, but a school, patiently guiding you toward freedom. When you respond not with control, but with release, samsara has delivered its lesson. There is great compassion in seeing samsara not as a punishment, but as a teacher. Instead of cursing suffering, you bow to it as the messenger that awakens you. Instead of resenting the cycles of life, you recognize them as opportunities for insight. This shift does not erase pain, but it gives pain a purpose. It becomes the voice of wisdom, stripping away illusions and guiding you back to what is real. Even the darkest nights under this view are not wasted. They become part of the path because they peel away what cannot last and reveal what endures. Samsara also exposes the cost of clinging to identity. Each time you insist, I am this, I must be this, life shifts and shatters that illusion. A role ends, a job disappears, a status crumbles, and suffering rushes in. Samsara repeats this lesson again and again until you begin to see you are not a fixed self. The cycle of birth and death applies not only to bodies, but also to identities. To hold tightly to them is to suffer endlessly. To release them is to taste a freedom beyond roles and labels. This teacher is relentless but precise. It insists, identity is impermanent. Do not chain yourself to it. The cycles of craving and dissatisfaction likewise reveal the limits of desire. You want, you chase, you achieve, you tire, you want again. The wheel spins endlessly. At first, this feels like personal failure. Why can I never stay satisfied? But the lesson is not that you are broken. The lesson is that desire itself, by its nature, cannot bring lasting peace. Samsara repeats this truth until it becomes undeniable. The end of craving is not in fulfilling every want, but in recognizing that the cycle itself cannot satisfy. Patience with samsara as teacher allows compassion to deepen. When you see someone caught in their own repeating cycles, you no longer only judge, you recognize the wheel they are turning on, the lessons that are still unfolding. Instead of irritation, empathy arises. You know wisdom ripens at its own pace, and no cycle can be rushed. Everyone, like you, are a student of samsara, stumbling toward release. Even death, the greatest turn of the wheel, carries its own teaching. To see death not as an enemy, but as a teacher, is to see it as the final reminder that control is impossible and clinging is futile. Death teaches urgency, not to delay love, not to postpone awakening, not to waste this breath. It teaches humility, not to believe you own life, not to pretend permanence is yours. To live with awareness of death is to let samsara itself push you toward freedom. Samsara, as teacher, is not cruel, it is simply honest. It reflects the consequences of clinging again and again until truth can no longer be ignored. When you resist, the wheel feels merciless. When you listen, the wheel becomes guidance. The repetition of suffering is not punishment, it is instruction. The question is never whether samsara will turn, but whether you will learn. When you shift to this view, frustration loses some of its sting. Life's repetitions stop feeling like traps and start becoming invitations. Each cycle whispers, will you cling again, or will you release? Each return becomes a chance to step closer to freedom. Samsara does not need to be feared or hated. It only needs to be understood. Within its endless turning lies the key to stepping beyond it. And so the very wheel that once imprisoned you becomes the wheel that teaches you. Every rise and fall, every joy and sorrow, every gain and loss, all of it points to the same truth. Let go. This is how samsara, once seen as an enemy, reveals itself as the greatest teacher, one that never gives up until the lesson is complete. When you begin to see samsara not as punishment but as a teacher, another door quietly opens, and the cycles of gain and loss, joy and pain, rise and fall, each pointing beyond themselves towards something deeper. The lesson they keep repeating is that clinging to certainty is the root of unrest. For beneath all our striving, questions and attempts at control lies a hunger to know, to secure, to fix reality into something solid. But Buddhism whispers a different truth. The deepest confidence is not in what you can hold, but in what you cannot grasp. This is the Zen of emptiness, the quiet strength of trusting what cannot be pinned down. Emptiness is one of the most misunderstood teachings. To many, it sounds bleak, like a void where nothing matters. But emptiness in Buddhism is not nothingness. It is the recognition that nothing exists in isolation, that nothing stands alone, and nothing has a fixed essence. Everything arises through causes and conditions, endlessly shifting and endlessly interwoven, and to see this is to realize that the solidity we cling to was never there. While this might seem frightening at first, it is actually the greatest relief, because if nothing is fixed, everything is possible. The human mind craves certainty. We want guarantees of success, assurances of love, promises of safety, yet life refuses to give them. Every attempt to force certainty collapses into frustration. The Zen of emptiness invites you to step into the space of not knowing, to rest in the openness where certainty was never needed. This is not passive resignation, but trust in the living mystery of existence, a learning to find confidence, not in rigid answers but in the very groundlessness of life. When you trust emptiness, you begin to see that the need for certainty was a cage, for the demand for fixed answers keeps you trapped in anxiety, since no answer ever lasts. Solve one problem, another arises. Settle one doubt, another appears. The mind never rests, because it is looking for permanence in a world that is fluid. But emptiness teaches you to release the demand for final answers, and instead live fully in the unfolding moment. In this way, peace does not come from knowing, but from letting go of the need to know. This is why Zen masters often taught through paradox. When asked for certainty, they offered riddles instead, and when students sought solid ground, they were given koans that broke the logic of the mind. The point was never to confuse but to free, and by breaking the craving for graspable answers, the teacher pointed the student toward direct experience, the raw immediacy of life, as it is. In that space the mind learns to rest in openness, to trust the silence beyond concept. Emptiness also dissolves the burden of identity, for if the self is not fixed, if it too is empty of solid essence, then you are not trapped in who you think you must be. The labels you wear, the stories you repeat, and the roles you cling to are all shifting, interdependent, and impermanent. And trusting emptiness means trusting that you can let these labels go without losing yourself. In fact, by letting them go, you discover a freedom greater than any identity could ever offer. For you are not a single story. You are a living process, open to transformation. This teaching is not abstract, but touches every aspect of life. Consider relationships. Much of the suffering in love comes from demanding certainty, wanting guarantees of permanence, or needing promises of unchanging affection. But when you trust emptiness, love becomes freer. You no longer grasp to lock it in place. Instead, you meet it as it arises, treasuring each moment of connection for what it is, without clinging to it as something that must last forever. This makes love more alive, not less, as it shifts from ownership to presence. Work and ambition, too, are softened by this view, since the demand for certainty in outcomes often leads to burnout and despair. When you rest in emptiness, you act with dedication, but without the desperate need for guarantees. You put forth effort, but trust the openness of condition. Success or failure no longer define you, because both are empty of fixed meaning. They arise, they pass, they teach, and they dissolve. Confidence grows, not from controlling outcomes, but from knowing you can meet whatever arises with openness. Even fear itself begins to change under the lens of emptiness. Fear thrives on the unknown. Yet when you learn to rest in not knowing, fear loses its grip. You no longer fight uncertainty, but lean into it, and the unknown becomes a place of possibility rather than threat. Each moment unfolds fresh, unbound by past definitions. And in this way, emptiness turns the space of anxiety into the space of freedom. Meditation practice becomes the direct training ground for this trust. When thoughts arise, you see they are empty. They appear, fade, and cannot be grasped. When sensations shift, you see they too are empty of permanence. Even the sense of I is seen as a collection of changing processes. Each time you notice this, you rest a little more deeply in the openness beneath it all. And over time, the habit of clinging weakens as trust in emptiness grows natural. This trust also transforms how you meet suffering. Pain still arises, but you no longer chain it to a fixed identity. Instead of saying, I am suffering, you see suffering as a passing process empty of permanence. And this space allows compassion to grow. You suffer less because you no longer build a self around the pain. You meet it, you learn from it, and you let it move. So emptiness turns even suffering into an expression of freedom. The Zen of emptiness is also the Zen of presence. For when you stop demanding certainty, you return to what is here, breathing, hearing, seeing, touching life in its raw immediacy. You begin to notice that this moment is always enough, and certainty about tomorrow is no longer needed, because the richness of now is fully alive. This is why Zen emphasizes simplicity. Sitting, walking, eating, breathing, each act is complete in itself. When met with openness, the courage to trust emptiness also reshapes your view of death. For if the self is not a fixed essence, then death is not the annihilation of something solid, but the continuation of change. The body returns to earth, the breath dissolves into air, and the mind's processes end their cycle. Death is the ultimate expression of emptiness, the release of all clinging, and to trust this is to live without fear. To see death not as a void, but as part of the endless openness of existence, is to shift perspective into a way of being, where living with trust in emptiness does not mean abandoning responsibility, but rather acting from clarity instead of clinging. You still care, and you still engage, yet your care is lighter, and your engagement freer, allowing you to give fully, without demanding permanence, to love deeply without needing guarantees, and to work with dedication without tying your worth to outcomes. This way of living is not careless but fearless, for the Zen of emptiness invites you into a confidence that cannot be broken, since it does not depend on what can be held, but rather on the openness of meeting life without needing to trap it in concept. Such confidence is not loud or boastful, but quiet, steady, and unshakable, growing not from having answers but from being free of the demand for answers. When emptiness is trusted, life itself becomes lighter, as the weight of needing everything to make sense dissolves, and the pressure of demanding guarantees fades, teaching you to walk without burden, breathe without fear, and live without clinging. The space of not knowing, once feared, becomes the very ground of freedom, and from that ground compassion, wisdom, and joy naturally arise. When the insight of emptiness settles into the heart, a natural question arises. If nothing exists on its own, and everything is open and ungraspable, then how does life continue to unfold? Why do events arise the way they do? The Buddha gave a profound answer, explaining that nothing happens by chance, and nothing happens by one person's control, for everything arises through dependent origination, a vast web of causes and conditions, so intricate that no single mind could ever hold. To see this truth is to be released from the exhausting illusion that you are the master of all outcomes, for dependent origination is not an abstract concept, but the very texture of daily life. Every word you speak is shaped by your upbringing, by the language taught to you, by the people you have met, and by the moods you carry in that moment, while even a simple act like drinking water depends on countless conditions: the rain that filled the river, the workers who built the pipes, the energy that pumps it to your home, and the evolution of life that gave you a body needing hydration. When you pause to see this, the ordinary becomes extraordinary, every act revealed as the flowering of countless invisible roots. Yet the illusion of control grows, because the mind narrows its vision, seeing only the small space of personal effort, while forgetting the wider web. You believe you control success, because you worked hard, forgetting the teachers who guided you, the family who supported you, the society that built the systems you live in, and the strangers whose unseen labor gave you the time and resources to pursue your path. Likewise, when failure arrives, you may blame yourself completely, ignoring the countless conditions beyond your reach. Yet dependent origination reveals the arrogance of both pride and self-blame, for neither success nor failure belongs fully to you. They are co-creations of the vast network of causes. This understanding brings deep humility, reminding you that you are part of the web, not its master, and while your choices matter, they are always woven into a larger tapestry beyond your grasp. Your actions have weight, yet they are threads woven into a fabric much larger than you. And humility in this recognition is not weakness but clarity, for it frees you from carrying the impossible burden of total control and allows you to act with integrity, knowing that the outcome is shared with the universe. This clarity enables you to give your best without the crushing pressure to guarantee results, and it also reveals the interdependence of suffering. When anger arises in someone toward you, it is not born in that moment alone, but carries roots from their childhood, from their stresses, from the culture that shaped them, from the endless chain of conditions feeding their state of mind. And seeing this truth opens the door to compassion instead of only personal hurt. Their anger is not simply theirs, but the fruit of 1,000 unseen seeds. And compassion arises because you know they are caught in the same web of causes as you. This perspective also transforms how you hold your own pain. For instead of seeing suffering as proof of personal failure, you begin to see it as the natural result of condition. Depression, anxiety, grief, these are not signs that you are broken, but reflections of countless conditions converging in this moment. Such a view does not erase responsibility, but removes shame, allowing you to take steps toward creating new conditions without believing that your worth is defined by the present ones. And understanding dependent origination turns self-condemnation into patience. One of the most liberating aspects of this teaching is how it dissolves isolation, for the illusion of control makes you feel alone, carrying your fate on your shoulders. Yet dependent origination reminds you that you are never separate. You breathe air given by trees, eat food cultivated by others, think thoughts shaped by centuries of culture, and in this realization, loneliness dissolves because connection is not optional, but the very nature of existence. The illusion of control, however, drives much of human conflict. Nations fight believing they can dominate the course of history, ignoring the tangled complexity of economic, cultural, and ecological conditions that shape events, while individuals argue, each convinced they alone direct the truth, forgetting that even their opinions are the result of influences beyond their choosing. When dependent origination is understood, arrogance softens, the clinging to absolute certainty loosens, and space opens for dialogue, empathy. In daily life, this truth can be felt in the smallest details, for even a simple smile you give a stranger may ease their sorrow, shaping how they treat the next person in a ripple that extends beyond your sight. Though it may feel like a small choice, it was in fact the meeting point of countless conditions. You had enough rest to be kind. They happened to cross your path at that precise moment. The weather did not weigh you down. Everything comes together in subtle, hidden ways. To live with awareness of this is to live with reverence, knowing that no act is isolated, and meditation deepens this insight further by revealing that even the very sense of self is dependently original. The thought I am is not a solid truth, but a chain of sensations, memories, cultural conditioning, and habits arising together. And when the mind quiets, you see the self not as a possession, but as a process. This recognition dissolves the illusion of a controller behind the scenes. For life flows without needing an owner. Breathing happens, thoughts happen, awareness happens, all dependently, all without a fixed self pulling the strings. Trusting dependent origination frees you from endless striving, for you no longer waste energy trying to hold together what cannot be controlled, and instead you focus on planting wholesome conditions, kindness, honesty, mindfulness, compassion, watering the seeds you can, while knowing that the harvest depends on countless other factors. This brings peace because your role becomes clear: contribute wisely, but release the demand to control the whole field. Such a way of seeing also reshapes how you relate to time, for the illusion of control makes you obsessed with predicting and forcing the future, while dependent origination reveals that the future is the product of innumerable causes, most of which are invisible to you. This does not mean idleness, but rather acting in the present with clarity, trusting that the web will weave itself in ways you cannot foresee. The future ceases to be a cage of fear, because you no longer demand certainty from it, and in recognizing the fragility of control, you find beauty, which opens into gratitude. When something good unfolds, you see the miracle of conditions aligning. A meal on your table is not simply the result of your effort, but of the sun, the rain, the soil, the farmer, the cook, and the countless hands that touched it before it reached you. And to eat with such awareness is to eat with reverence. Gratitude becomes natural when you perceive the web behind each moment, and this teaching also nurtures forgiveness, for when others harm you, dependent origination reveals the complexity behind their action. They too are shaped by suffering, by ignorance, by chains of causes beyond their choosing, and while this does not excuse harm, it dissolves the illusion that they acted from pure malice or absolute control. Forgiveness becomes possible because you see them not as monsters, but as beings caught in conditions, just as you are. Dependent origination calls you to humility, compassion, and trust. Humility, because you realize you do not control the universe. Compassion, because you see that all are entangled in conditions beyond their will. And trust, because you learn to act wisely and release the rest. This triad replaces the burden of control with the lightness of participation. You are not the owner of reality, but a contributor to its unfolding. As this insight deepens, the illusion of control becomes almost laughable, and you notice how often the mind insists, "I did this, I made this happen," while ignoring the infinite conditions that made it possible, and how often you blame yourself for what could never have been within your reach. The grip loosens, and with it suffering loosens, leaving behind a simple clarity. Life is a web, and you are Your freedom is not in controlling the web, but in weaving your part with wisdom and love. And in this way, dependent origination dissolves the myth of isolation and control, opening the way to a deeper trust in life. Every event, every thought, every breath is part of an immeasurable tapestry, and to live in awareness of this truth is to live in harmony with reality, free from the exhausting demand to control what was never yours to command. When the teaching of dependent origination becomes clear, another illusion begins to lose its grip. If everything arises from countless causes and nothing stands alone, then the self you cling to as solid and unchanging cannot be what it seems. The identity you defend, the roles you claim, the story you repeat about who you are, all of these are shifting, fragile, and dependent as well. Yet much of human suffering comes from trying to freeze this ever-changing process into a fixed self. To let go of this rigid identity is not to lose yourself, but to discover a freedom that carries you with the flow of life rather than against it. The belief in a fixed self is deeply ingrained from childhood. You are taught to define yourself by your name, your achievements, your personality, your opinions, and society reinforces this through endless labels of success or failure, strength or weakness, worthiness or unworthiness. You begin to think of yourself as a permanent thing, a separate entity that must be protected at all costs. But in reality, the self you defend so fiercely shifts every moment. Who you were yesterday is not who you are today, and who you are today is not who you will be tomorrow. This rigidity of identity creates endless tension, for you feel pressure to live up to your own labels, to maintain consistency, even when your inner truth is changing. You cling to old roles long after they have served their purpose, and you defend outdated stories, even when they bring you pain. This struggle arises from mistaking a flowing river for a frozen statue, for life is motion, but the fixed self tries to stop that motion, and in doing so, suffering grows. When you release the belief in a fixed self, you allow life to breathe through you, no longer demanding that you remain the same, and in this release you are free to evolve. Identity becomes a tool rather than a prison, something you can step into when it serves compassion, and step out of when it no longer fits. This flexibility is not weakness but wisdom. Just as a tree bends with the wind and does not break, so too do you learn to move with the current of existence without clinging to one rigid form. Such release brings deep compassion for yourself, for the rigid self is harsh and demanding, condemning every mistake as permanent failure. But when you see the self as fluid, mistakes become moments rather than definition. You grow, learn, and transform without carrying the weight of permanent judgment. And this gentler view allows healing, as you stop stabbing yourself with the illusion of permanence and begin to treat yourself as a living process, capable of renewal at every breath. Letting go of fixed identity also transforms relationships, since much conflict comes from locking others into rigid roles, believing they will always be the way they once were, or expecting them never to change, which prevents true connection. But when you see that everyone is fluid, that each person is a changing process like you grant them the freedom to grow, and love deepens, because it no longer depends on clinging to an old version of someone. Trust grows not because it rests on permanence, but because it rests on openness to change, and even your relationship with the past begins to soften. A rigid identity ties you to old wounds and old glories, insisting they define you. But when you let go, the past becomes part of your flow, rather than a prison. Painful experiences may shape you, but they do not fix you. Triumphs may enrich you, but they do not freeze you. You are not a sum of events carved in stone, but the living movement that carries those experiences forward, transforming them into wisdom. The fear of letting go often comes from believing that, without a fixed self, you will be lost. Yet the truth is the opposite. The more you release, the more you discover a deeper ground of being that is not bound by labels or roles. This ground is awareness itself, the open space in which all experiences rise and pass. And awareness does not need to cling to any identity to exist. It flows steadily, with whatever arises, unshaken. To rest in this awareness is to trust the flow of life at its core. In practical life, letting go of the fixed self creates resilience. For when circumstances shift, the rigid self breaks, unable to adapt, while the fluid self flows, meeting change with flexibility. Job loss, illness, aging, loss of status. These may crush the one who insists on staying the same, but for the one who has released the rigid identity, they are simply part of the river. Pain may still come, but it does not destroy, for there is strength in being able to say, I can change too. This release also opens creativity, for the fixed self clings only to what is known, afraid of looking foolish and desperate to preserve a stable image, while the fluid self experiments, explores and plays, unafraid of mistakes, because mistakes do not define it. Creativity flourishes in freedom, and freedom grows when you stop protecting a rigid identity. Every new possibility in life requires letting go of the old self that resists it, and trusting the flow means trusting that you can step into new forms without losing what matters most. Meditation reveals this truth directly, for when you watch the mind closely, you see that the sense of self is built moment by moment. Thoughts of the past, sensations in the body, images of who you believe you are, and none of these last. Yet together they create the illusion of a solid me. In stillness you see that this me is not fixed, but a story arising and dissolving, and each time you notice this, the grip loosens, and trust in the flow of awareness deepens. Letting go of fixed self also reshapes how you hold death, for if you believe the self is solid, death feels like terrifying annihilation, but when you see the self as a flow of causes and conditions, death is simply another transformation. Just as each day you shed identities and take on new ones, death is the shedding of one form so that the flow of life continues in other ways, and fear softens when you realize you were never a fixed entity to begin with. The release of rigid identity is not the abandonment of responsibility, but a wiser way of living, for you still act and you still care, only now without the heavy chains of permanence. You still cultivate values, but you hold them lightly, knowing they too may evolve, and integrity grows, not from clinging to a permanent self-image, but from responding truthfully to each moment. You live authentically, not by defending who you think you are, but by allowing who you are to unfold naturally, and these unfolding nurtures deeper trust in the universe. When you stop fighting to maintain a fixed self, you allow life to carry you. The river moves, and you move with it, not as a rigid rock, but as part of the current. Trusting the flow means resting in the knowledge that change will always carry you somewhere new, and that awareness will always be present to meet it. This trust brings peace because you no longer fear losing yourself, for you were never fixed to begin with. To live this way is to live lightly. Labels lose their weight, failures lose their sting, and successes lose their chains. You become more playful, more compassionate, and more present because you are no longer burdened with defending an identity. Each day becomes an opportunity to meet life freshly, without the prison of who you think you must be. This freedom is not abstract. It touches every breath, every relationship, every step. Letting go of fixed self does not erase you. It reveals you, uncovering the spaciousness beneath the story, the openness that has always been here. To trust this flow is to find confidence not in permanence but in movement, not in control but in release, and in this release, life carries you more gently, guiding you not through force, but through the quiet wisdom of change. When the grip of a fixed self loosens and you begin to flow with change, the question of achievement naturally comes forward. For so long achievement was tied to identity, proving worth, securing status, building permanence. But once you see that the self is fluid, The old drive to prove yourself through endless striving begins to feel hollow, and a new way of living becomes possible, one where achievement is no longer chased like a prize, but arises naturally from presence. This is the paradox of non-striving. The less you cling to achievement, the more deeply your life becomes fulfilled. Striving is fueled by the belief that happiness lives somewhere ahead, at the end of a completed task, a reached milestone, or a won prize. You run toward it with urgency, sacrificing the present moment in the hope that one day you will finally arrive. Yet the pattern always repeats. When the goal is reached, satisfaction fades, and a new chase begins. This cycle of striving is exhausting because it places your peace outside of yourself, forever in the distance. Non-striving cuts through this cycle by showing you that fulfillment does not need to be earned through endless struggle. It does not mean idleness or apathy, nor sitting back and refusing to engage with life. It means working, creating and contributing, without the constant pressure of proving or securing your worth. When effort is freed from the burden of grasping, it becomes lighter, more joyful, and paradoxically more effective. For actions flow from clarity and presence rather than desperation. In this way, true achievement arises not because you force it, but because you are fully aligned with what you do. Think of the difference between someone playing music out of love and someone playing only to win applause. The first loses themselves in the sound, becoming one with the flow of notes, while the second is trapped in self-consciousness, measuring, comparing and clinging. Both may produce sound, but only the first experiences true achievement, where the act itself is complete in the moment. This is the essence of non-striving, doing for the sake of doing, letting the act itself be the reward. When striving falls away, so does the anxiety of constant comparison. Striving thrives on measurement. Who is ahead? Who is behind? Who is better? Who is worse? And from this comparison grow envy, insecurity, and endless dissatisfaction. Non-striving frees you from this treadmill. You are no longer running against anyone. You are simply walking your own path, each step whole in itself. Paradoxically, this often allows you to go further because your energy is no longer drained by fear and competition. Non-striving also brings clarity to ambition. Goals can still exist, but they no longer carry the weight of your self-worth. You can pursue them wholeheartedly, yet you do not collapse if they are not reached. The process becomes as meaningful as the result, and so every moment holds value. Ambition shifts from a desperate chase into a path of learning and growth. Success becomes a byproduct of presence rather than the sole measure of life. There is great freedom in acting without demanding outcomes. You do what is skillful, compassionate, and true, and then you let go. If recognition comes, it comes. If results arrive, they arrive. If failure appears, it too is part of the unfolding. In this way of living, the tension of striving dissolves, leaving only the quiet dignity of presence. Strangely, it is often when you stop clutching at success that success finds you, for your actions are no longer clouded by fear or greed. Non-striving also opens the door to creativity. A striving mind is rigid, clinging to plans, terrified of mistakes. But creativity flourishes in openness, in the willingness to explore without guarantee. When perfection is no longer demanded, ideas flow more freely. You take risks, experiment, and grow, because your worth is not tied to flawless outcomes. Many of the world's greatest discoveries and works of art emerge not from forced effort, but from playful exploration and presence with the process, rather than obsession with the prize. This teaching also reshapes your relationship with time. Striving turns life into a race against the clock, filling days with urgency. Non-striving slows you down. It reveals that each moment is already complete, that nothing is missing from now. Time expands. You begin to notice what striving once made invisible: the sound of birds, the rhythm of your breath, the warmth of sunlight. Life stops being a corridor to an imagined future and becomes a field of richness in every step. Meditation is the clearest training ground for this truth. Many begin meditation as they approach work or study, straining for silence, forcing concentration, chasing peace. Yet the more you strive, the more restless the mind becomes. The breakthrough comes when you stop demanding results. You sit, breathe, and allow whatever arises to arise. In that release, calm and clarity often appear naturally. The paradox is that when you stop trying to make the mind quiet, quietness finds you. Non-striving also transforms how you face obstacles. Striving resists them, fights them, demands they vanish. Non-striving meets them with curiosity and openness. Obstacles become part of the path, not barriers to it. You engage them without panic, and often find they are less solid than they seemed. By letting go of the belief that life must always be smooth, you uncover resilience. Achievement becomes not just reaching goals, but living fully through difficulty. In relationships, non-striving creates intimacy. Striving in love tries to mold the other, to secure promises, to control how affection should look. Non-striving allows love to breathe. You show up with presence rather than grasping. You listen without needing to win. You give without calculating return. Love becomes purer because it is free of hidden demands. The connection itself becomes the achievement. Letting go of striving ripens into compassion, not only for yourself, but for all beings. Once you stop believing that life is a constant contest, you soften. You no longer measure your worth in endless ledgers of achievement, and so you no longer demand perfection from yourself or others. What emerges is tenderness. Compassion begins inward. Without it, surrender feels like defeat, a collapse into weakness. With compassion, surrender becomes care. It is the willingness to rest when exhaustion sets in, to forgive yourself when mistakes arise, to stop bowing before impossible standards. In this light, letting go is not abandonment, it is nourishment, a return to balance. Sometimes the most courageous act is not to push harder, but to release the grip and allow space for healing. This compassion then extends outward. When you cling to control over others, even out of love, you unintentionally confine them. You shape them into your expectations, robbing them of the freedom to stumble, learn, and grow in their own rhythm. Compassionate surrender loosens this grip. It says, I trust you to find your way, even if it is different from mine. In this trust, relationships breathe. They are no longer battlegrounds of control, but spaces of freedom and respect. Compassion also transforms how you meet conflict. Instead of seeing another's anger, fear, or mistake as a personal threat, you recognize the conditions behind it, their pain, their history, their longing to be safe and whole. This vision dissolves blame and opens the heart. You respond not with hostility, but with understanding. To surrender through compassion is to lay down the weapons of control and pick up the tools of care. In this way, surrender is not passive. It is an active choice to stop fueling cycles of suffering. It is the recognition that love carries more power than fear, and that control, though it promises safety, often deepens division. True strength lies not in tightening your fist, but in opening your hand. Even when others choose paths that differ from what you envisioned, compassionate surrender remains an act of trust in their unfolding. It does not mean neglect or indifference, but rather the deep care that says, I love you enough to let you walk your way. This release dissolves much of the conflict that so often burdens relationships. For many arguments are rooted in the urge to control, insisting that others think, feel, or act as we do. When you surrender with compassion, the grip loose. You listen without demanding agreement. You support without insisting on compliance, and you discover that peace arises not through victory in battles of will, but through relinquishing the need to win at all. Control breeds resistance, while compassion fosters harmony. On a broader scale, surrender through compassion becomes the way you meet the suffering of the world. You cannot stop every war, prevent every disaster, or heal every wound, yet you can choose how you meet these realities. You can soften into compassion instead of hardening into despair. Let go of the illusion that you must fix everything alone, and contribute what you can with care. This surrender frees you to act without being paralyzed by the immensity of suffering. There is profound strength in such surrender, not born of weakness but of love. A parent loosening their grip so a child may grow in independence. A friend releasing expectations so the other can breathe. A leader stepping back to listen instead of forcing their will. These are acts of true courage. They reveal that real power lies in creating space for growth, not in domination. This same compassion heals the wounds of self-judgment. Control thrives on harshness, whispering that you must be better, faster, stronger, perfect. It fuels inner conflict and endless strife. But when compassion guides surrender, the need for domination over yourself dissolves. You allow your humanity to exist without condemnation, walking the path with sincerity rather than cruelty. This is not apathy, but growth with gentleness. In meditation, this truth becomes clear. The attempt to control the mind, to push thoughts away, to force silence, creates only tension. Yet when compassion enters, you surrender control. You allow thoughts to rise and fall without judgment. You meet restlessness with kindness, and in this gentle allowing, quietness appears more naturally than force ever could. The very act of letting go, guided by care, becomes the gateway to peace. In daily life, compassionate surrender can be practiced in steady, ordinary ways. When plans collapse, instead of clinging with anger, you release with kindness, acknowledging disappointment while refusing to add more suffering. When someone disagrees with you, instead of pressing your view, you surrender the need to be right and listen with openness. Each act of surrender lightens the burden of control and deepens your connection to life. This way of being also transforms your understanding of strength. Culture often praises dominance, rigidity, and unyielding will, but the Dharma points to another form of strength, the strength to yield, to soften, to let go. Just as a river shapes mountains not by force but by steady flow, compassionate surrender wears down the sharp edges of suffering, carving space for healing and gentleness. Strength is not found in clinging, but in caring enough to release, even in the face of pain. In this surrender, resilience is born. When hardship arises, the instinctive response is often to fight, resist, and control every detail. But this resistance tends to deepen pain rather than relieve it. Compassion teaches a different way, to surrender into care, offering yourself rest instead of relentless pressure, offering others presence instead of solutions. In this surrender, you discover that endurance grows stronger, not weaker, because you are no longer exhausting yourself in futile battles against what cannot be controlled. Compassionate surrender also reshapes how you meet death, the final letting go so often feared as ultimate defeat. Through compassion, death is no longer seen as a failure of control, but as the last act of release, the return to flow. Meeting your own death with compassion means softening into acceptance, allowing the body and mind to complete their cycle with dignity. Meeting the death of others with compassion means releasing clinging, letting grief move naturally while holding them in love without demanding that they remain. This way of living is not passive. In fact, it gives your actions greater meaning. When your choices arise, not from the hunger to control, but from compassion, they become cleaner, freer, and more impactful. You give not to prove, but to serve. You work not to dominate, but to contribute. And you love not to possess, but to nurture. Every act becomes lighter, yet more powerful, because it is rooted in care rather than fear. To surrender through compassion is to live with open hands instead of clenched fists, to exchange the exhausting battle for control with the steady presence of care. Such surrender does not diminish you. It expands you, allowing you to hold yourself and others with kindness, letting life move freely without chains of fear. In this way, surrender becomes not the loss of strength, but its highest expression. And when surrender through compassion becomes your way of moving in the world, another subtle but profound shift appears. You begin to notice how even acts of kindness, even moments of generosity, can carry a hidden hunger, the desire to be seen, to be thanked, to be validated. This craving for recognition can quietly transform giving into another form of control. The path of the Bodhisattva points beyond this. It teaches a deeper trust, to act from love without needing applause, to serve without craving acknowledgement, to let generosity be complete in itself. This is Bodhisattva trust, the freedom of giving freely, with no strings attached. The desire for recognition is deeply human. From childhood, you are praised for good behavior, rewarded for achievements, and affirmed for acts of kindness. Over time, the mind learns to link giving with acknowledgement, so you begin to help not just to help, but to be seen helping, to share not only to share, but to be admired for your generosity. This is not evil, it is human, but if left unchecked, it chains even your noblest acts to the restless hunger for validation. The Bodhisattva path breaks these chains. A Bodhisattva acts not to gain something, but to reduce suffering wherever it appears. Recognition may come, or it may not. Gratitude may be expressed, or it may remain silent, but the act itself is already enough. Compassion does not require applause to be real. This trust is deeply liberating. You give because giving itself is joy, because kindness itself is fulfillment. The cycle of giving ends with the act itself, not with the approval or recognition of others. When you practice in this way, giving becomes light and unburdened. You are no longer weighed down by disappointment when gratitude is absent, nor inflated by pride when recognition appears. Both praise and neglect are understood as passing winds, not as the true measure of your worth. The joy of giving is already complete in the very moment of offering, whether anyone notices or not, because the heart expands in the act itself. This is the essence of Bodhisattva trust, the courage to act from love and let go of the outcome. Living in this trust also dissolves resentment. Many people become bitter when their efforts are ignored or unacknowledged, when they give tirelessly to family, work, or community, but receive no thanks in return. This bitterness reveals that their giving was secretly tied to recognition. When you act from Bodhisattva trust, resentment cannot take root, because you know the act was worthwhile, simply because it alleviated suffering, even if no word of thanks was spoken. Your joy is whole in itself, and does not depend on another's acknowledgement. This teaching also protects you from the ego's subtle traps. Recognition, while pleasurable, is also intoxicating. Praise for kindness feels good, but it can create attachment to image. You may begin to act, not from pure compassion, but from the desire to maintain the reputation of being generous. Bodhisattva trust cuts through this trap by reminding you that the truest generosity is invisible. The greatest acts of kindness leave no trace, no story, and sometimes no witness at all. They are known only to the giver, and perhaps not even remembered by them. In this invisibility lies purity. Acting without recognition also deepens resilience. If your compassion depends on applause, it will falter the moment silence surrounds it. But if your giving flows from the fullness of your heart, no lack of recognition can discourage you. You continue to serve because generosity is part of your nature, not because the world claps for you. This resilience is what enables bodhisattvas to keep serving endlessly, even in the face of indifference or ingratitude. Everyday life offers countless chances to embody this teaching. You might hold a door for someone who walks past without acknowledgement, spend hours helping a friend who soon forgets, or work diligently at a task no one notices. In these moments, the ego protests, demanding recognition. But if you breathe and release, you feel a deeper joy, the quiet knowing that your action arose from care that is already complete. The value of your kindness is never diminished by silence. This perspective also dissolves the illusion of separation. Recognition rests on the belief that there is a giver and a receiver, a benefactor and a beneficiary. Yet, in truth, every act of giving is mutual. In giving, you also receive the joy of generosity, the softening of ego, the deepening of connection through compassion. Releasing the need for recognition allows you to feel this mutuality more clearly, to see giving not as one-directional, but as part of the flow of interdependence. Meditation on compassion strengthens this practice. As you breathe, you send wishes of love and well-being into the world without anyone ever knowing. No recognition is possible, and yet the heart expands. Over time, you discover that this inner generosity is as real and transformative as any outer act. It trains you to give without expectation, to love without needing return. The joy of these meditations is subtle but profound, revealing that recognition was never the true source of fulfillment. This insight also transforms leadership and service. Leaders who crave recognition often manipulate circumstances to secure glory for themselves, even while pretending to serve. By contrast, true leadership grounded in bodhisattva trust seeks no personal gain, focusing instead on the well-being of others regardless of credit. Paradoxically, it is precisely such leaders free from self-interest who inspire the deepest respect, for people sense the purity of their intention. But whether recognition arises or not, the joy of the bodhisattva is already full in the act of serving. Letting go of the craving for recognition also frees you from the fear of judgment, for when you give only to be seen, every act becomes a performance, tangled in anxiety about how others perceive you. Yet when recognition is irrelevant, fear dissolves, and you are free to act from authenticity without concern for appearances. This freedom opens the space for deeper and truer kindness. Kindness guided only by compassion itself. The joy of acting without needing recognition is not dramatic. It does not blaze like pride when praised or collapse like bitterness when ignored. It is like a quiet, steady flame, warm and unwavering, untouched by the winds of approval or neglect. This inner flame sustains every act of giving, not needing the fuel of applause because it burns from within. To live this way is to trust deeply in the path itself, to trust that kindness matters even if unseen, that compassion shapes the world even if unacknowledged, and that love holds value even without validation. This trust makes the bodhisattva path unshakable, for it sustains endless giving, not through recognition, but through the fulfillment found in the act itself. Such trust also nourishes humility. When you release the craving for recognition, you stop placing yourself at the center of every act, and the focus shifts outward, toward the needs of others and the easing of suffering. You come to see that your role is not to stand as the hero of the story, but simply to serve as a channel for compassion. This humility does not erase your presence, but liberates it. No longer burdened by the constant need to prove yourself, you are free to give fully and without hesitation. To act without needing recognition is not easy. The craving runs deep, and the world constantly feeds it, praising generosity, rewarding achievement, and urging you to measure your worth through acknowledgement. Yet each time you release that hunger, each time you allow kindness to be enough, you taste freedom. Over time, this practice becomes natural. You no longer calculate returns or keep score of gratitude. You give because giving is beautiful. You love because love is complete in itself. You no longer wait for thanks because you are already whole. This is the essence of bodhicitta trust, the confidence that compassion is its own reward. The faith that love needs no witness to be real, and the freedom of giving without clinging. To live this way is to discover that the greatest recognition comes not from others, but from within. The quiet joy of knowing your heart has expanded, your life has aligned with compassion, and your presence has lightened the suffering of the world, whether anyone notices or not. As you begin to act without needing recognition, your heart grows lighter and your steps more natural, and yet a question lingers. How do you live in a world that never stops shifting, where circumstances refuse to stay still, and even your best intentions are met with obstacles? The answer lies not only in scripture, but in the teachings of nature, in the simple and wordless Dharma of the river. The river reveals how to live with grace through change, how to move forward without forcing, and how to adapt without losing direction. A river has no arrogance, yet it carves valleys and nourishes fields. It does not cling to form, yet it always finds its way to the ocean. It meets rocks, bends, and barriers, but instead of breaking against them, it softens, adjusts, and continues. This is not weakness, but the deepest strength, for to live like a river is to recognize that adaptability is not a betrayal of yourself, but fidelity to the truth that life is movement. The human mind, however, often rebels against this truth. It clings to certainty, fixed ground, and unchanging order, but life offers no such stability. Jobs shift, health changes, relationships evolve, and identities dissolve, and to resist this ever-moving reality is to suffer endlessly. To adopt the way of the river is to discover peace in the midst of motion, to live with direction, but without rigidity. Flow does not mean drifting aimlessly or surrendering your purpose. It means holding your essence while meeting each condition with flexibility, just as water remains water no matter what form it takes, whether it runs as a stream, swirls in a pool, or cascades as a waterfall. In the same way, you remain rooted in awareness, no matter how life bends you. This practice begins by noticing how much of your suffering comes from resistance. You may cling to one path, one outcome, one fixed idea of how things must unfold. And when life turns differently, tension arises. The tighter the grip, the greater the fracture. Flow teaches you to loosen, to trust that change itself carries intelligence. Just as a river does not resist the bend in its course, but uses it to move forward, you can let unexpected turns become part of your journey rather than obstacles to it. There is humility in living this way. The river does not claim to shape the terrain, it simply responds to it. Likewise, when you release the illusion of control and practice responsiveness, life shifts from being a battle to becoming a dialogue. You begin to listen to circumstances, to align your steps with what is present, and in doing so, you discover that adaptability itself is a form of grace. This is not passivity, but skillful alignment. Flow is a discipline of listening and responding rather than forcing and resisting. The Dharma of flow also reveals the union of softness and strength. Water is gentle to the touch, yet it wears away stone and reshapes landscapes. Its strength does not come from rigidity or violence, but from persistence and adaptability. In your own life, this means learning to meet hardship with steady presence instead of rigid control, to persist without hardening, to endure without losing compassion. Living in flow also cultivates patience. A river does not rush, yet it never ceases moving toward the sea. Its progress is steady, not hurried, and it trusts the journey without needing to measure every mile. In the same way, you can release the urgency of forcing results. Flow teaches that progress may not be visible moment to moment, but steady presence carries you forward. Patience here is not idle waiting, but moving without clinging to speed or demanding immediate outcomes. This patience brings peace because you no longer measure life against the clock of achievement. Obstacles, too, are transformed by this wisdom. Where striving sees a rock as a barrier, flow sees a chance to bend, to gather strength, or to carve a new path. When circumstances do not match your plan, instead of despair, you can ask, how can I adjust here? This mindset builds resilience, for no obstacle becomes final. Like water, you may move around it, soften it with time, or gather strength until you can pass through. Relationships also benefit from this way of being. Rigidity in relationships breeds conflict, demanding that others remain unchanged, that they conform to your expectations. Flow brings space. It honors the natural shifts of others, while staying rooted in care. Just as a river nourishes what it touches without clinging, you too can bring kindness into relationships without trying to control or freeze them. In such spaciousness, love breathes freely, creating harmony instead of resistance. Flow also eases the inner life. Emotions rise and fall like currents: anger, sadness, joy, and fear, each moving through you in their own time. To resist them is to dam the river, to trap energy and create stagnation. But when you allow emotions to move through with awareness, neither clinging to joy nor resisting sorrow, the river of your being clears itself. To flow is to let emotions come and let them go, allowing them their passage without denial and without chains. This openness transforms emotions from jailers into teachers, each carrying a message before passing on, leaving space for peace to return. Flow reshapes ambition as well, softening the grip of rigid planning. Instead of forcing a fixed outcome, you act with clarity of intention, while remaining open to how conditions unfold. You may set a direction, yet you release the demand for it to look exactly as imagined, and in doing so, you create space for life to surprise you, for doors to open that you could never have designed yourself. Many of the most meaningful paths arise not from clinging, but from flowing with opportunities as they appear. Meditation becomes a training ground for this way of living, where thoughts and sensations rise like ripples on the surface of water. The instinct may be to hold them or push them away, but when you practice flow, you simply let them move. Your attention rests like the riverbed, steady beneath the current, teaching you directly that peace does not come from stopping the flow, but from resting with it. The mind becomes spacious, not by being emptied of movement, but by no longer clinging to what moves through it. The Dharma of flow also nurtures gratitude, for when rigidity loosens, beauty reveals itself in every moment. Just as a river sparkles in sunlight, each detail of life begins to shine when met without grasping. The taste of food, the sound of laughter, the rhythm of breath, all become precious. Gratitude arises naturally when you stop resisting reality and begin flowing with it. In times of loss, this teaching becomes especially powerful. Loss is the place where control is most visibly shattered, and the instinct is to cling, to resist, to break against the sharp rocks of grief. But flow teaches another way. You allow grief to move through you like a current, heavy though it may be, trusting that even the deepest waters eventually carry you forward. You do not deny the pain, nor do you harden against it. Instead, you let it shape you, soften you, and guide you into new landscapes of compassion. To live by the Dharma of flow is to live with trust, not blind trust, but trust in life's very nature as movement. You do not need to know each turn of the river to know it will continue to flow, nor must you control every condition to trust that you will be able to respond. This trust grows not from certainty, but from the steady experience that life, like water, will always carry you forward if you allow it. In this way, the river ceases to be merely a metaphor and becomes a teacher you carry within. Each time you feel rigid, you remember its softness. Each time you feel blocked, you remember its adaptability. Each time you feel anxious about the future, you remember its patience. To adopt the Dharma of flow is to let nature itself guide your practice, showing you that freedom is not found in stillness alone, but in graceful movement through the ever-changing stream of existence. And when the lesson of the river sinks deeply into your being, you realize that flow is not only about movement, but also about stillness, for water rests in calm pools, just as surely as it rushes through rapids. In the same way, the path of trust is not only in adapting to change, but also in allowing space, pauses, and silence to reveal what words and answers cannot. The human mind, restless and conditioned, is addicted to filling every gap, demanding explanations, and seeking solutions for each uncertainty. Yet some of the deepest wisdom arrives not in the noise of answers, but in the quiet that holds them. Trusting silence more than answers opens the door to a knowing that cannot be forced, a wisdom that blossoms only when you stop trying to chase it. The endless urge to seek answers often rises from fear, for not knowing feels dangerous, as if silence were a void threatening to consume you. So, you grasp at conclusions, repeat familiar narratives, or reach for reassurance from others. Yet most answers are temporary comforts, fragile shields against the vastness of uncertainty. Silence, by contrast, does not pretend. It allows the unknown to remain unknown, and in doing so teaches you to rest within it, without fear. This resting is not ignorance, but courage. It is the willingness to meet reality, without rushing to label it, without forcing it into boxes that cannot contain it. Silence also teaches presence. In conversation, most people listen only to respond, filling the air with their own thoughts. But when you allow silence, you begin to hear not only the words but the feelings beneath them, the pauses where meaning lingers unspoken. In these spaces, understanding deepens, reminding you that wisdom often lies not in what is said, but in what is held between the words. To trust silence is to honor this depth more than the surface of explanation. In meditation, this lesson becomes direct. At first, the mind chases thoughts, analyzing and seeking solutions to every question it raises. Silence feels uncomfortable, even threatening, like emptiness stretching without end. But with time, you discover it is not empty at all. It is full of awareness, of presence, of pure being. Insights arise, not because you hunted them down, but because you allowed them the space to appear naturally. The silence itself becomes the teacher, showing that truth cannot be grasped, but only revealed when the mind grows still enough to receive it. Trusting silence also reshapes the way you approach challenges. The impulse to force immediate solutions often leads to rushed choices, while resting in silence lets conditions ripen on their own. Answers arise like clarity in muddy water. When the stirring ceases, the sediment settles, and the water clears. From this stillness, action flows with precision and calm rather than panic and haste. In relationships, silence carries a power equal to words. There are moments when no explanation eases another's sorrow, when no argument mends a fracture. In such times, presence itself, silent companionship, a quiet hand to hold, a listening ear, communicates more deeply than language ever could. Trusting silence here means believing that connection is not dependent on fixing or explaining, but on simply being with another in their difficulty. Silence also unveils the richness of the present moment. When the noise of constant seeking subsides, subtleties emerge that had always been there, yet unnoticed. The rhythm of the breath, the whisper of wind and leaves, the stillness of a room between movements. These are not trivial, they are the very texture of life. In silence, the ordinary becomes luminous, revealing itself as sacred in its simplicity. Wisdom here is no longer about solving or explaining, but about seeing clearly and experiencing fully. The practice of trusting silence also dissolves the ego's relentless need for validation, for the urge to always have answers is often the ego defending its image of certainty and authority. Silence humbles you, showing that not knowing is not weakness but truth, for reality is boundless while the mind is finite. Accepting this truth is what brings peace. You no longer need to pretend mastery over everything, for in humility you find rest, allowing the vastness of life to remain mysterious. This humility becomes the very ground of compassion, because when you stop filling silence with your own certainty, you create space for others. You grow more patient, more open to difference, more willing to hear perspectives without rushing to impose your own. Silence teaches you to hold others gently, to honor them without controlling them with explanations, to let the space itself carry meaning. In this way, silence becomes an act of kindness, a way of saying, I trust you enough to allow your truth to breathe. Trusting silence more than answers also transforms your relationship with fear of the future. The mind craves certainty, endlessly trying to fill the silence of the unknown with plans, predictions, and imagined outcomes. But the future cannot be fully known. When you rest in the silence of uncertainty, you uncover courage, realizing that the unknown is not a void of danger, but a field of possibility. Answers may come later, but the silence itself holds you now, steady and alive. Even in the face of death, silence offers its deepest teaching. No philosophy, doctrine, or belief can fully resolve the mystery of what lies beyond life. The gap remains, untouched by explanations. To trust silence here is perhaps the most profound act of faith, not faith in specific answers, but faith in the openness of existence itself. Such trust allows you to meet mortality not with denial or false certainty, but with presence, dignity, and peace. To practice trusting silence is not to reject knowledge or abandon learning, but to recognize that answers are limited and wisdom stretches far beyond them. It is to give reverence to the spaces between thoughts, to the pauses in conversation, to the quiet stirrings of the heart. Silence does not compete with answers, it completes them, reminding you that truth is often greater than what words can capture. The more you live in this way, the more natural it becomes to pause, to breathe, to listen. You no longer rush to resolve every discomfort. Instead, you allow space itself to be your teacher. Over time, silence becomes a companion, guiding you gently into deeper trust. And in that trust, life stops feeling like a puzzle that demands solving and begins to unfold as a mystery to be lived. As silence reveals its wisdom, another truth becomes clear. The restless urge to fill it with answers arises not only from fear of the unknown, but also from the ego's insatiable need for control. The ego cannot rest in uncertainty, because uncertainty threatens its illusion of solidity. It insists on being right, on feeling secure, on placing itself at the center around which life must revolve. This grip on certainty is one of the ego's deepest traps, rooted in the false belief in a separate, fixed self. To see how the ego clings is to see why suffering endures, and to loosen that grip is to step toward true freedom. The ego's hunger for certainty begins early, as you learn to define yourself through labels, roles, and achieve. Soon identity becomes equated with control. If you can predict, manage, and dominate circumstances, the fragile image of self feels protected. Yet this protection is only an illusion, endlessly threatened by the unpredictability of life. Every unexpected change feels like an attack, because the ego depends on stability that reality does not provide. This is why the ego resists silence so fiercely, because silence leaves a space it cannot occupy, a space where its claim to control dissolves. In silence, the need to know is revealed as a craving, and the lack of control stands undeniable The ego rushes to fill this space with explanations, arguments, judgments, and plans. Yet the more tightly it grips, the more fragile it becomes. Because control can never be secured in a world built on impermanence and interdependence. At the root of this desperation lies the illusion of a separate self. You believe yourself to be an isolated unit, cut off from the whole, tasked with defending your existence against the uncertainty of life. From this perspective, control seems nonsense. If you are separate, then safety must be manufactured by force. But when you look more deeply, you see that separateness is not real. Every part of you, your body, your thoughts, your feelings, arises from conditions you did not create. Breath enters from the air. Food becomes your flesh. Language shapes the very thoughts you imagine to be your own. The self you cling to is a weaving of countless threads, each borrowed from beyond you. And so the more you grasp at certainty, the more restless you become. The ego convinces you that if only you knew for sure about the future, about others, about yourself, then you would finally be safe. But every answer it invents dissolves. Plans change. People surprise you. Even your own moods shift from moment to moment. The self that craves stability is itself unstable. Thus, the chase for certainty becomes endless, a cycle with no rest. To see this clearly is to begin loosening the ego's grip. The Buddha taught that clinging is the root of suffering, and nowhere is clinging more visible than in the ego's obsession with certainty. You cling to beliefs, to opinions, to identities, not because they are ultimate truths, but because they give the feeling of solidity. When someone challenges them, you feel personally attacked, as though your very survival were threatened. This is the ego defending its illusion of permanence. Yet, when you step back, you realize that certainty was never real to begin with. What you were defending was not truth, but a story. And this insight is not meant to leave you unmoored. It is meant to offer deeper trust. Real stability does not come from fixed answers or rigid control. It comes from realizing that you do not need certainty in order to live fully. When the ego loosens, you begin to see that life carries you forward, whether or not you clutch at it. The ground of being is not control, but awareness itself, an awareness that does not need to know everything in order to rest in peace. Looking at the ego's grip also reveals how much human conflict grows from this illusion. Wars are fought over ideologies, communities fracture over beliefs, relationships unravel over the need to be right. Beneath it all lies the ego's terror of uncertainty, its refusal to admit not knowing. Each side clings to certainty, as though existence itself depended on it, when in truth, existence requires no such grasping, only the ego does. You can see the same pattern in your own life. You cling to routines, not merely for structure, but for reassurance. You argue with loved ones, not because truth itself is in danger, but because your identity feels threatened by being wrong. You resist change not because it truly harms you, but because it dissolves the illusion of control. Every one of these reactions is the ego's attempt to shield itself from uncertainty. Meditation lays this process bare. When you sit quietly, the mind races with thoughts. What should I do? How will this turn out? What does this mean? Each thought is the ego's effort to manufacture certainty in a reality that will not be pinned down. Yet when you observe without feeding them, you begin to see the futility of this grasping, and in that recognition, a new freedom stirs. Thoughts arise and pass, yet awareness remains, unshaken by their movement. The self that demands control is exposed as nothing more than passing waves upon a deeper, stiller sea. Trust grows when you stop believing the ego's lie, that safety is built on control. Instead, you begin to see that safety comes from alignment with truth, from openness to change, from the humility of admitting not knowing. The less you cling, the more space you create for wisdom to move through you. Certainty was never required for compassion, never required for integrity, never required for love. These qualities do not depend on rigid guarantees. They thrive in the spaciousness of freedom. To let go of the ego's grip is not to abandon discernment, but to recognize the difference between clinging and wisdom. Wisdom sees clearly and responds skillfully, but it does not demand absolute security. Clinging insists on guarantees even when they are impossible. When the ego loosens, wisdom has room to guide you. You act with clarity, but without the crushing weight of needing certainty. This shift transforms your relationship with fear. Fear often rises from the unknown, the endless what-ifs that the ego insists must be answered. The ego believes that fear dissolves through certainty, but in truth, fear dissolves only through trust. When you see that the separate self is an illusion, you realize there was never anyone who needed protection from uncertainty in the first place. Life moves and you move with it. Fear loses its foundation when the grip of the ego is released. Yet the grip on certainty is perhaps the most subtle chain of all, because it disguises itself as strength. To be firm, decisive, unshakable, this sounds noble, but when rooted in ego, they are nothing more than fear in armor. Real strength is the courage to admit uncertainty, to stand without rigid ground, to let awareness itself be enough. This is not passivity, but the deepest form of freedom. The more you see through the illusion of the separate self, the lighter life becomes. The self you defended was never solid, and so there is nothing to protect. Without this burden, you can meet each moment as it is, without demanding that it uphold your identity. This openness makes intimacy with life possible, because you no longer stand apart from it. The illusion of separation dissolves, and with it the desperate need for certainty. To live this way is to walk with humility, knowing that answers will always be partial, control always limited, and certainty always an illusion. Yet it is also to walk with freedom, for none of these are required for peace. What once felt like weakness, the admission of not knowing, becomes the ground of your greatest strength. The ego's grip weakens, and in its place arises a quiet trust in the unfolding of life itself. And when you see how deeply the ego clings to certainty, another hidden attachment comes into view, the obsession with time. Beneath the drive to control outcomes and protect identity lies a quieter but equally powerful grip, the mind's fixation on when. It measures, schedules, anticipates, regrets, constantly asking, when will this change? When will I arrive? When will peace come? This urgency binds you not only to clocks and calendars, but also to restlessness within. To release the attachment to time does not mean denying its practical function, but rather no longer living as though freedom depends on the next moment. True peace is not discovered in the future. It is discovered when you rest in awareness that is timeless, the presence beneath all passing hours. Time becomes a prison when it is mistaken as the measure of your worth. When the mind constantly compares what has been with what might be, leaving you absent from the only reality that truly exists, the present. Looking back, you feel regret, convinced too much was wasted. Looking forward, you feel pressure, fearing there is not enough left. Caught in between, you rush to accomplish before it is too late, or cling to the past, believing your best days are already gone. In all these cases, happiness is imagined to exist somewhere else along the timeline, never here. The grip of when breeds dissatisfaction, creating restlessness that no accomplishment or memory can satisfy. Non-attachment to time does not mean abandoning responsibility or ignoring schedules. Rather, it is a shift from being enslaved by time to seeing it as a simple tool. When you recognize that awareness itself is not bound by past or future, life begins to open more directly. Each moment becomes complete, not because it leads to another, but because it is already whole. In this recognition, the urgency of when dissolves, and the anxiety that once dominated softens. This practice transforms your relationship with the past. Memory is not erased, nor is it worshipped. You can honor experiences, learn from them, and carry their lessons, but you no longer believe they define you permanently. Mistakes lose their sting when seen as arising from conditions that no longer exist, while the glory of past achievements loosens its hold, for clinging to them prevents new growth. Non-attachment allows the past to be acknowledged without being a chain. It equally reshapes your view of the future. Anticipation so often creates as much suffering as the events themselves, as the mind races to secure outcomes, guarantee success, or avoid imagined pain. Yet the future never arrives exactly as expected. Non-attachment does not mean negligence. It means preparing wisely without obsession, holding intentions lightly without imprisoning yourself in them. You act with clarity now, trusting that what unfolds will be met when it comes, not before. In daily life, attachment to time reveals itself in countless small habits. Checking the clock repeatedly, as though minutes themselves could bring relief. Rushing through meals, conversations, or even moments of rest, because the mind is already chasing the next task. These are not signs of efficiency, but symptoms of enslavement to time. Non-attachment offers another way: to slow down, to taste food with full attention, to listen without distraction, to rest without guilt. Through this, life regains a depth and richness that rushing can never provide. Meditation shows this most clearly. As you sit and observe, thoughts about past and future appear, yet awareness itself is untouched by them. Resting in that awareness, moments dissolve into a seamless flow, and the pressure of when fades. In that space, peace is not postponed to some imagined alignment of future events. It is here within the stillness of awareness. This perspective also softens the fear of aging. Much suffering arises from counting years, from dreading decline, from comparing the present self to younger versions. But when you release attachment to time, you see that life is always unfolding in the present, regardless of age. The body may change, roles may shift, but awareness itself remains continuous, ageless, timeless, untouched. What matters is not how many years remain, but how fully this moment is lived. For non-attachment to time deepens compassion by freeing you from urgency and allowing you to truly be with others. In this freedom, you listen without rushing to end the conversation. You support without demanding results by a certain deadline, and your care is felt more deeply because it is measured not by the clock, but by the fullness of your presence. This teaching reshapes how you see achievement as well, for striving for milestones so often turns life into a race against time, where success is measured by speed, by whether you are ahead or behind others. Yet non-attachment reveals that growth has its own rhythm, like fruit ripening in its season, neither forced nor hurried. True accomplishment is found not in arriving by a certain time, but in living with integrity in each step of the path. Letting go of when also eases anxiety about uncertainty, for much worry comes from needing to know when something will begin or end, when pain will stop, when the solution will appear, when the answer will come. But life rarely grants such guarantees, and in resting within timeless awareness you release this demand, trusting that not knowing when is part of existence, and that the present can be met without certainty. There is beauty in discovering timelessness in simple things: the shifting colors of dusk, the rhythm of waves, the stillness of sitting quietly, reminders that life itself is not bound to schedules, that you belong to something vast beyond clocks and calendars. Non-attachment allows you to taste this vastness without fear. To live in this way is not to deny time, but to see through its tyranny, to plan and act, and meet responsibilities without letting time dictate your worth or withhold your peace. Each breath becomes both path and destination, and the question of when loses its grip, because the answer is always here. Non-attachment to time is ultimately a practice of trust. Trust that the past has given its lessons. Trust that the future will unfold as it must. Trust that the present is enough. In releasing the urgency of when, you discover timeless awareness, the space where peace is always available, where presence is complete, and where freedom is no longer postponed to some later moment. And when the weight of time loosens its hold and you begin to rest in the spaciousness of the present, another door quietly opens before you. To live without being enslaved by when means you no longer hide behind the illusion of certainty or the defense of schedule. What rises then is something raw and often feared: vulnerability. For many, it feels like exposure, like standing unprotected before a storm. Yet vulnerability is not weakness, but the ground from which genuine courage grows. To surrender into vulnerability is to meet life openly, without armor, and in that openness lies the deepest strength. Vulnerability is feared because it strips away control. You cannot predict how others will respond when you reveal your pain, your longing, your truth, nor can you guarantee that love will be returned or that kindness will be recognized. The ego, obsessed with certainty, recoils from such risk, yet in closing yourself off to avoid hurt, you also close yourself off from connection, joy, and growth. The courage of vulnerability is the willingness to remain open, even when outcomes cannot be controlled. And at its heart, vulnerability is honesty, the choice to show up as you are rather than hiding behind masks of perfection. This honesty creates space for genuine connection, for people trust you more when they sense authenticity, and in that trust, they find permission to rest in their own humanity. Walls of defense may prevent rejection, but they also prevent intimacy, and when you risk being seen, you give others the courage to see themselves more clearly. Vulnerability also reshapes how you meet suffering, for while many endure pain in silence, convinced that admitting it shows weakness, vulnerability transforms suffering into shared humanity. Speaking your truth invites compassion and lightens the burden, not because pain disappears, but because it no longer isolates you. In this way, vulnerability turns loneliness into connection, teaching that courage is not about carrying everything alone, but about allowing others to walk with you. In relationships, vulnerability is the seed of love. Without it, love becomes performance, gestures, roles, appearances maintained for approval, but with it, love becomes real. To say "I need you, I was wrong, I am afraid," requires a courage greater than any external achievement, dissolving barriers and opening hearts to one another. Vulnerability makes love deeper because it is no longer built on illusion, but on truth. Even in leadership, vulnerability is strength, for a leader who pretends to be invincible creates distance, while one who admits uncertainty and seeks input builds trust. This kind of courage inspires not through flawless control, but through authentic humanity, showing that strength is not knowing everything, but being willing to learn, adjust, and grow. Vulnerability in leadership creates resilience in communities where people feel seen, valued, and invited to contribute. Spiritual practice, too, thrives in vulnerability, for to sit in meditation is to face yourself without distraction or you see your restlessness, fears, and longing for control, and though the exposure feels uncomfortable at first, it becomes the gateway to liberation. Only by allowing yourself to be seen by your own awareness can true healing begin. Vulnerability before yourself is as courageous as vulnerability before others, for it dissolves the illusions that separate you from authenticity. Vulnerability is also the gateway to compassion, because when you admit your own fragility, you begin to see it in others. Judgment softens as you recognize that everyone carries hidden struggles. The person who lashes out may be shielding pain. The one who seems cold may be terrified of rejection. By owning your vulnerability, you cultivate empathy for theirs, not in pity, but in connection, in understanding that courage is shared by all who dare to live with open heart. To live vulnerably also requires surrendering the need to always appear strong, for strength is too often mistaken for invulnerability, when in truth, invulnerability is an illusion. Real strength is not the absence of pain, but the willingness to face it. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act with fear present. The courage of vulnerability is the quiet but powerful act of saying, I do not have all the answers. I may be hurt. I may fail, but I will remain open anyway. For this openness is the soil where creativity flourishes. To create art, music, or writing is to expose your inner world to others. And without vulnerability, creativity becomes imitation. But with it, creativity becomes authentic expression, carrying the power to touch heart. Vulnerability in creativity carries the risk of being misunderstood or rejected, yet it is also the path to genuine impact. For the works that resonate most deeply are born from the courage to reveal what is fragile, uncertain, and true. In daily life, vulnerability is practiced in small acts, admitting you do not know, asking for help, expressing gratitude, apologizing sincerely, and though these gestures may feel uncomfortable, they carry profound strength. Each time you choose vulnerability, you loosen the ego's grip and affirm that openness is no danger, but freedom. And over time, these small acts create a life marked not by fear, but by authenticity. Vulnerability also reshapes your relationship with failure, for while the ego fears failure because it exposes imperfection, vulnerability allows you to face it without shame, to see it not as proof of inadequacy, but as part of growth. This perspective transforms failure into learning, learning into resilience, and resilience into wisdom. Vulnerability frees you from the need to hide mistakes, allowing you to integrate them into your journey with honesty. Even in the face of death, vulnerability offers dignity, the courage to admit fear, to acknowledge uncertainty, and to allow grief. These are not signs of weakness but of being fully human, and vulnerability at life's end allows connection with others, honesty with oneself, and acceptance of the mystery. It takes courage to face death with openness, but that courage transforms fear into peace. The courage of vulnerability is not reckless exposure, not pouring out everything to everyone without discernment, but wise openness guided by compassion for yourself and others. It means choosing moments of honesty that build connection, deepen understanding, and align you with truth. It requires balance, but at its core is always surrendering the illusion of control in order to live authentically. To walk this path is to discover that vulnerability is not the opposite of strength, but its foundation, for strength without vulnerability is brittle and cracks under pressure, while strength with vulnerability is flexible, bending, adapting, and enduring. When you embrace vulnerability, you discover a courage no armor can provide, the courage to live openly, to connect deeply, and to surrender to life as it is. When the courage of vulnerability begins to guide your steps, you start to see that openness itself leads you into mysteries the rational mind cannot resolve. To be vulnerable is to admit you do not always know, that life resists neat explanation, that uncertainty cannot be defeated by logic alone. This realization brings you face to face with paradox, with truths that cannot be solved like puzzles, but only lived. In Zen tradition, these are called koans, questions or riddles that break the grip of the intellect and open the heart to something deep. Yet koans are not found only in monasteries. They appear every day, woven into the contradictions of ordinary life. Learning to accept paradox without forcing resolution becomes a profound practice in trust. The mind is conditioned to seek closure, to believe that every question must have an answer, every tension must be resolved, and every contradiction must be explained. And though this drive offers the illusion of control, it also traps you in frustration. Some questions do not have final answers. Some situations hold opposing truths at once, and when you try to force clarity, you only suffer. Everyday koans teach that peace does not lie in resolving the paradox, but in learning to rest inside it. Love itself is one such koan, for it is both joy and pain, both freedom and responsibility, both gift and vulnerability, and to demand that it be only one thing is to distort it, while to accept the paradox is to live more fully within it, allowing contradictions to deepen rather than diminish your experience. Love is a living koan, unsolvable, yet transformative when embraced. Another everyday koan is found in the balance between effort and surrender. You must act, yet you must also let go. You must prepare, yet you must trust. Both sides seem contradictory, yet together they reveal a truth beyond logic. For life asks for both at once. The mind, however, wants a formula: either control everything or abandon all effort. But the koan teaches that truth is held only when both are embraced with humility. These everyday paradoxes show the limits of intellect. Logic can measure, compare, and analyze, but it cannot touch the depth of lived experience. A koan unsettles the mind precisely to point beyond it. And when you encounter the riddle of how life can be both beautiful and tragic at once, the mind cannot solve it, but the heart can hold it. This holding is not passive, but wisdom itself. Learning to live with paradox also reshapes how you approach suffering. For pain and growth often arrive together. Loss can deepen gratitude, and fragility can reveal strength. The mind asks, how can both be true? But the koan does not resolve the tension. It invites you to step fully into it. When you stop demanding that suffering make logical sense, you begin to see its teaching more clearly. Life is not about avoiding contradictions, but about walking through them with openness. In meditation, paradox often arises. You are told to rest without striving, yet remain alert, to release thought, yet not push thought away. To the mind, these seem contradictions, but to awareness they are invitations into a deeper space, where both coexist. Meditation itself becomes a living koan, showing that truth often transcends the categories the mind demands. The practice of koans is not about answers, but transformation. And when you sit with paradox, something soft, the restless drive for resolution grows quiet, and you discover a new capacity to rest in the unknown without fear. This capacity is trust, a recognition that life is vast, mysterious, and irreducible to logic. You begin to see that not every question needs solving, not every contradiction needs resolution, not every uncertainty needs closure. Everyday life is filled with such koans, if you pay attention. Parenting requires guiding children, yet letting them go. Work demands effort, yet outcomes are never fully yours. Even your own mind is a koan, for the more you search for self, the less solid it becomes. Each of these is unsolvable, yet each points you toward wisdom, if you allow it to remain open. This practice also transforms relationships, where many conflicts arise from the insistence on resolution. Who is right? Who is wrong? What is the single truth? But often both sides carry truth, even if contradictory, and to hold paradox in relationships is to say both our experiences matter even if they do not align neatly. This does not eliminate difficulty, but it creates space for compassion. You no longer need to force unity by denying complexity, because you can love within the paradox rather than against it. Trusting life beyond logic does not mean abandoning reason, but rather recognizing its limits and complementing it with openness. Logic builds bridges, cures disease, and organizes knowledge, but it cannot teach you how to love, how to forgive, or how to live with mortality. These require the courage to sit with what cannot be solved. Koans remind you that wisdom is not always clarity, but sometimes the strength to hold what is unclear. The courage to accept paradox also softens your relationship with control, for the mind craves clean solutions as a way to avoid vulnerability. Yet when you accept paradox, you no longer demand neatness. You allow life to remain messy, contradictory, and alive. In this way, paradox becomes a teacher of humility, showing you that your categories are too small for reality, and that wisdom lies not in shrinking reality to fit them, but in expanding your heart to embrace what they cannot contain. In daily practice, this begins by noticing where paradox unsettles you. When you feel torn between two truths, resist the urge to dismiss one, and instead sit with both. Feel the discomfort and allow it to teach you For over time you will discover that the discomfort itself is part of the path, stretching your capacity for openness and deepening your trust. Everyday koans are everywhere, not waiting to be solved, but to be lived, asking you to step beyond the narrow gate of logic into the vastness of being. When you accept them, life itself becomes your teacher, and you begin to see that wisdom is not a tidy set of answers, but a willingness to walk into paradox with open hands and an open heart. When the practice of sitting with paradox begins to settle in your heart, you notice another place where the mind struggles most, in dealing with the lives of others. Just as the mind wants to solve contradictions, it also wants to shape people, to direct them, to insist that their path should mirror your vision of what is right. This desire often hides behind love, responsibility, or care, but at its core, it is another form of control. The truth is painful and liberating at once. You cannot walk another's path for them, nor can you dictate the lessons they must learn. Relinquishing control over others' journeys is one of the deepest practices of trust, allowing love to breathe without suffocation. The urge to shape another's path often comes from fear. You want those you love to avoid mistakes, to be safe from harm, to find success without struggle. So you advise, correct, and sometimes interfere, believing your vision is clearer than theirs. But each person carries their own rhythm, their own timing, and their own unique lessons. And to impose your will is to confuse care with control. True compassion recognizes that growth cannot be forced. It ripens in its own season. Letting go of control does not mean indifference, but a shift from directing to supporting, from pushing to holding space. You can still offer guidance, but you release the expectation that it must be followed. You can share wisdom, but you trust that each person will integrate it in their own way, or perhaps not at all. This trust honors their autonomy, acknowledging that their path, like yours, is shaped by countless causes and conditions beyond anyone's control. Parents feel this struggle most deeply, for the instinct to protect children is natural. Yet when protection turns into over-control, it stifles growth. A child learns resilience, not by being shielded from every fall, but by standing up after falling. And to relinquish control here is to allow room for mistakes, knowing that mistakes themselves are teachers. It is the courage to let children live their own lives, even when their choices differ from what you would have chosen. And in relationships of love or friendship, the illusion of control often hides as expectation, where you want your partner to grow in the way you imagine, to reflect your ideals, to live according to your plans. And when they do not, frustration or disappointment arises, revealing that the love was conditional, dependent on them following your script. To relinquish control is to love without script, to support without chains. And this creates a space where love matures into respect, where connection is based on freedom rather than demand. Even in the workplace or community, control over others' paths can appear subtly, as when you believe your way of solving problems is the only correct one, or that others should think and act as you do. But this rigidity limits creativity and erases diversity, while letting go recognizes that many paths can lead to wisdom and many approaches can bear fruit. By allowing others to walk differently, you not only honor their uniqueness, but also open yourself to learning from perspectives you would never have discovered alone. The difficulty in letting go lies in the illusion that control equals care, for you fear that if you release control, others will suffer. Yet suffering cannot be eliminated by domination, and even if you could shape every step of someone's path, they would still face change, loss, and impermanence. What liberates is not your control, but their capacity to meet life directly, and relinquishing control allows them to discover this capacity, to find their own strength, rather than depend on yours. Meditation on interdependence can help soften this grip, for when you observe the flow of causes and conditions, you see that no single person directs another's life, as choices arise from countless influences: family, culture, circumstance, karma. And to imagine you alone can control another's journey is to deny this way. With awareness, humility grows, and you see that while you can contribute support, you cannot dictate destiny, and this humility brings peace, because it frees you from an impossible burden. Letting go of control also prevents resentment, for when you insist others must follow your way, you set yourself up for disappointment, and when they do not, you feel ignored or unappreciated, which poisons relationships and turns care into conflict. But when you release the expectation of control, you act from generosity rather than demand, offering support freely, without strings attached, and whether or not it is received, your peace remains intact. This practice deepens compassion, because it teaches you to see others as capable beings, rather than extensions of yourself, to stop viewing their choices as reflections of your worth, and instead to respect their struggles as their own. You begin to understand that love is not possession, but presence, the willingness to walk alongside without steering the direction. And this presence is more healing than control could ever be, because it affirms the dignity of the other. Relinquishing control also means releasing the idea that you know best. For while you may have more experience in certain areas, you cannot know the totality of another's inner world. Their fears, dreams, and karmic lessons are hidden from you. What may look like a mistake to you could be the doorway to their greatest growth, and what may appear as failure could be the soil of resilience. To let go is to accept that you do not see the whole picture, and that their unfolding belongs to them, not to your vision. This does not mean withdrawing from care. On the contrary, it makes your care purer, because when you support without controlling, your actions come from love rather than fear. You encourage, guide, and protect when necessary, but you also step back when it is time, and this balance allows your relationships to thrive, because those you care for feel both supported and respected. Sensing the difference between guidance that empowers and control that confine, the courage to release control over others' paths also liberates you, because trying to shape another's life is exhausting and ties your peace to their choices, making you anxious whenever they deviate. By letting go, you reclaim your energy and focus on your own growth, while trusting others to manage theirs. And paradoxically, this often strengthens relationships because your presence becomes lighter, freer, and less demanding. Even death offers this lesson, for watching loved ones suffer or face mortality brings the painful realization that you cannot control their journey. No matter how deeply you wish to take their pain away, you cannot walk that path for them. And to let go here is to honor their humanity, to be present with compassion without trying to rewrite their experience. It is perhaps the most profound act of respect to allow another to meet their own path, even at the end of life. Relinquishing control over others' paths requires humility, patience, and faith. Humility to admit you do not hold the answers for another's life, patience to allow their growth to unfold in its own time, and faith that the same wisdom guiding your journey also guides theirs. When you live this way, relationships shift from struggle to trust, from demand to freedom, from fear to love. And to walk this path is to embody a deeper form of compassion, one that respects freedom, honors difference, and trusts the unfolding of each being's journey. You discover that love does not need control to be strong. On the contrary, it becomes strongest when it allows others to walk their own way, while you walk beside them with open hands and an open heart. When you begin to release the need to shape another's journey, you are left standing face to face with your own, and the energy once poured into controlling others flows back toward you, until a deeper truth reveals itself, that the universe often shows you not what you want to see but what you are carrying with. Life reflects your state of mind, your fears, your trust, your openness, and your resistance. This is samsara's mirror. To trust the universe, you must also learn to trust yourself, because the two are never separate, and the outer world becomes a reflection of your inner stance, so that trust becomes reciprocal. The more you allow inner harmony, the more you perceive harmony around you. The idea that the world mirrors your state is not about magical thinking or bending reality to your moods. It is about perception and resonance. When you are anxious, every event seems threatening, but when you are calm, those same events seem manageable. The outer conditions may not change, but your inner condition changes how you meet them. And in this sense, samsara holds up a mirror, showing you not only the impermanence of life, but also the way your inner lens colors everything you see. Trusting yourself is not about confidence in abilities alone, but about trusting the deeper ground of awareness, the space within that can hold every experience without being shattered. When you learn to rest in this space, you discover that life's reflections no longer frighten you, for even suffering becomes less overwhelming because you see it as a message rather than an attack. The world mirrors your growth by shifting how events are felt within you, and this teaching changes the way you meet challenges. Instead of asking only, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What in me is being shown here?" This shift does not mean blaming yourself for hardship. It means recognizing that how you relate to hardship is shaped by your inner state, and if you meet loss with resistance, the mirror shows turmoil. If you meet loss or hardship with openness, the mirror shows resilience. For while the outer event remains the same, the reflection reveals your relationship with it. This mirror also teaches humility, because when conflict arises with others, the instinct is to focus on their faults. Yet if you pause, you may see your own fears reflected. Their anger might reveal your discomfort with anger. Their withdrawal might reflect your fear of abandonment. The mirror is not about fault, but about learning, as samsara reflects what is unfinished within you, so that you can meet it, understand it, and release control. Trusting yourself also means trusting that you can face whatever the mirror shows, even though people often resist inner reflection because they fear what they will see: weakness, fear, shame, or doubt. But trust reminds you that whatever arises, you are capable of meeting it, because awareness itself is never harmed by what it sees. This realization frees you to face yourself honestly, and in doing so, to face the world with greater clarity. The reciprocity of trust becomes clear in relationships, because when you trust yourself, you are less likely to demand constant reassurance from others. Instead, you meet them from a place of wholeness rather than need, and this trust allows them to feel safe too, since they are not burdened with carrying your insecurity. In turn, they often respond with greater openness, and the mirror reflects back the trust you extend inwardly. In meditation, this teaching is direct. Sit quietly, and the mind reflects itself in each thought and feeling. Restlessness, fear, joy, and peace all arise as reflections, and you begin to see that awareness itself is steady while the reflections shift. Trust grows as you realize you do not need to control or deny what arises, but simply meet it, and in that meeting its power softens. Meditation becomes a mirror where you practice trusting both the storms of the mind and the awareness that holds them, and this perspective transforms your relationship with the universe itself. Instead of viewing it as hostile or indifferent, you begin to see it as a mirror reflecting your own openness. When you carry trust, the world feels supportive. When you carry fear, the world feels threatening. This does not mean external events change instantly, but your way of perceiving them does, and that perception shapes how you respond, which in turn shapes what unfolds. Trust becomes a cycle, for trusting yourself allows you to trust the universe, which strengthens your trust in yourself, and this cycle also dissolves the illusion of separation. The ego insists you are here, and the universe is out there, that you must control the external to protect the internal. But the mirror shows otherwise. Inner and outer are not two. They reflect and influence each other constantly. When you accept this, the struggle to dominate life softens, and you begin to collaborate with existence rather than battle it. The mirror of samsara is not always gentle, for sometimes it confronts you with painful truths, attachments you must release, patterns you must see, and illusions you must outgrow. But these reflections are not punishments, they are teachers. The universe reflects what is within so that you have the chance to awaken. And trusting this process means believing that even discomfort has meaning, that even suffering is a teacher. pointing you back to yourself. Everyday life offers endless opportunities to practice this. When impatience arises in traffic, the mirror shows your relationship with waiting. And when jealousy arises in comparison, the mirror shows your relationship with self-worth. While when peace arises in simple moments, the mirror shows your capacity to rest. Each experience becomes a reflection, not a verdict, and to trust the mirror is to learn from it without fear. The courage to trust yourself and the universe together is what makes this teaching transformative, because without trust the mirror feels cruel, as though life were mocking you. But with trust the mirror becomes compassionate, showing you where you are ready to grow. You stop asking life to change before you can feel peace, and instead you begin to change your relationship with life, allowing peace to emerge naturally. To live this way is to embrace responsibility without blame, knowing you are not the sole creator of events, but that you are responsible for how you meet them. Samsara mirrors your inner stance, and in that reflection, you are invited to align with trust, choosing trust over fear, openness over rigidity, and presence over resistance, until the mirror reflects it back in ways both large and small. In the end, trusting the universe by trusting yourself is about recognizing the unity of inner and outer, self and world, as the boundary dissolves and what remains is participation in a vast unfold. You no longer see the universe as an enemy to outwit, but as a mirror guiding you toward your own awakening. And with that trust, you begin to walk more gently, more courageously, more freely, meeting each reflection, not with fear, but with gratitude. When you begin to see how samsara reflects your inner state, it becomes clear that much of what is mirrored back arises through what you say and what you withhold. For words carry energy, shaping both the world around you and the mind within, while silence too has its power, sometimes as healing presence, sometimes as avoidance, sometimes as wisdom. The challenge lies in discerning when speech binds you and when silence liberates you. For to release control in speech and silence is to walk with deeper sensitivity, learning that not every truth must be spoken, not every silence must be broken, and that freedom lies in the balance between the two. The urge to control through words is strong, as people often speak to prove themselves, to protect their image, to dominate, or to fill the discomfort of emptiness. But words used this way become armor, weapons, or distraction. When speech arises from fear or ego, it does not create connection, but instead creates bondage, entangling you in arguments, misunderstood intentions, and the weight of promises you cannot keep. While the more you cling to words as control, the more they control you. Silence, on the other hand, is often feared because it feels like emptiness, absence, or something missing, leading many to rush to fill it with chatter, explanations, or noise. Yet silence can be the most honest communication of all. When you sit in silence with another, there is no mask, no defense, no performance, only presence. And this kind of silence frees because it opens space for truth to emerge without fear. To practice releasing control here means becoming intimate with intention, pausing before you speak to ask whether this word is meant to heal or to dominate, whether it is born of clarity or of fear, and whether it serves understanding or simply the ego's need to be heard. In silence, you ask too, am I withholding because wisdom is here, or because I fear vulnerability? Am I silent because it is kind, or because it is avoidance? This awareness transforms both speech and silence into acts of mindfulness, rather than habits of control. There are moments when words are necessary, because silence in the face of injustice becomes complicity, and silence when someone reaches for help becomes neglect. Speech in these moments is not control, but compassion. To name truth, to offer comfort, to give guidance, forms of speech that free rather than bind. Yet, even then, the way words are spoken matters. For harsh truth, delivered without care, becomes another form of control, while gentle truth spoken with compassion becomes a doorway to healing. Likewise, there are moments when silence is the deepest gift. Arguments often escalate because each side insists on the last word, and in such moments, Silence is not defeat, but freedom, releasing the need to win and allowing tempers to cool. In relationships, silence can also be presence more powerful than explanation, because sitting with someone in grief without rushing to fix or explain often offers more comfort than any words could. But speech can become bondage when it builds identities that must be defended. When you declare, "I am this, I believe that, I will always do this," and then feel trapped when life shifts. Silence can become bondage too when it suppresses truth out of fear, when you stay quiet, not out of wisdom, but because you fear rejection. Releasing control means stepping beyond both extremes, seeing words and silence as tools rather than prisons, learning to use them skillfully instead of being used by them. This balance transforms relationships because many conflicts are less about the issue itself and more about words said carelessly or silences held too long. When you release control, you stop using words to manipulate or silence to punish, and instead you speak with honesty when it matters and rest in silence when it heals. This creates trust because others sense that your communication arises not from control, but from sincerity. Meditation reveals the nature of speech and silence within the mind itself, showing thoughts as inner words constantly narrating, explaining, controlling. When you sit and observe, you see how exhausting this chatter is, and you discover that silence beneath it is not empty but spacious. The more you rest there, the more you recognize that speech, when it arises, can come from this space too, from presence rather than compulsion. This is why meditators often speak less, not because they fear words, but because silence has taught them their true weight. Releasing control in speech and silence also dissolves the ego's grip on being right, because many words are spent defending opinions, forcing agreement, or proving superiority. But what if being right is not the point? What if listening, pausing, or letting go of the last word is the greater strength? This surrender does not weaken your truth, it frees it from ego. Silence here is not absence but presence strong enough not to need validation. And the practice reshapes how you relate to yourself as well, for the inner critic speaks constantly, controlling through harsh words. Learning silence within allows you to release this bondage, for you begin to see that you do not need to believe every inner word, and you can rest in the quiet beneath, where awareness does not condemn. This self-silence is not suppression, but freedom from the tyranny of endless judgment. In daily life, releasing control in speech and silence means moving slower with communication, not rushing to fill every pause, not rushing to defend every point, not rushing to prove yourself with words. It means trusting silence enough to let it carry meaning when words would only entangle, and trusting words enough to let them be spoken when silence would cause harm. This middle path makes communication both lighter and more powerful. Ultimately, the wisdom of speech and silence is about trust, for words cannot secure control over life, and silence cannot protect you from all pain, but both can become expressions of trust when guided by awareness. Speech becomes a way to share truth without demand. Silence becomes a way to rest in presence without fear, and together they create a rhythm of freedom, sometimes speaking, sometimes silent, always aligned with compassion rather than control. To live this way is to discover that communication is not about domination, but about connection. And when you release the need to control through words, and when you allow silence to speak in its own way, you begin to participate in dialogue with life itself. And in that dialogue, you discover that both speech and silence can be doorways to liberation, depending on how you hold. When you learn to release control in both speech and silence, you begin to notice something deeper, for beneath the words you choose and the pauses you hold is a larger truth. Life itself cannot be scripted. No matter how carefully you plan, the next moment is uncertain. At first, this feels like a burden, something to endure, but if you look closer, uncertainty is not only unavoidable, it is the very fabric that makes life alive. The shift comes when you stop merely tolerating unpredictability and begin to celebrate it, seeing uncertainty not as a threat, but as a source of wonder. This is joyful surrender, The mind is trained to seek stability. It wants everything mapped out, answers secured, and outcomes guaranteed. Yet life refuses to obey these demands. Storms appear without warning, plans collapse, opportunities emerge from nowhere. To the controlling mind, this feels like betrayal, but if life were perfectly predictable, it would also be lifeless, for the very joy of existence comes from surprise, from freshness, from the unfolding that cannot be fully known in advance. Joyful surrender is the willingness to lean into this unpredictability with trust. It is not resignation, which carries heaviness, but celebration, which carries lightness. You do not give up, you open up. You allow the unexpected to be a gift, rather than an enemy, and this shift changes everything. What once felt like chaos becomes opportunity. What once felt like danger becomes mystery. This way of living does not deny difficulty, for uncertainty includes pain, loss, and disappointment, but it also includes unexpected kindness, sudden insight, and unimagined joy. To surrender joyfully is to embrace both, to recognize that you cannot have surprise blessings without surprise challenges, for they are two sides of the same coin, and life's richness comes from its unpredictability. When you accept this, you no longer endure uncertainty. You delight in it, because trust is the foundation of this surrender, and without trust, uncertainty feels unbearable. But with trust, it becomes spacious. You begin to see that while you cannot predict outcomes, you can trust your ability to meet them. Trust that awareness itself remains stable, even when circumstances are not. And trust that unpredictability is not random, cruelty, but the very nature of existence. Trust turns uncertainty from a source of fear into a source of joy, a joy that is not loud or dramatic but quiet and steady, like laughter bubbling up. When you see the beauty of not knowing, you realize that the very things that once scared you, the missed turn, the unexpected meeting, the unplanned change, often became the most meaningful parts of your life, and this realization softens resistance. You stop fighting unpredictability and begin to see it as an ally. Meditation reveals this joy directly, for each breath is uncertain, each thought arises unexpectedly, and you cannot script the mind's flow. Yet in sitting with it, you discover peace. You stop demanding that meditation be predictable, and instead find joy in watching whatever arises, which teaches you that uncertainty is not an obstacle, but the very field where awareness blossoms in daily life. Joyful surrender then shows up in how you approach change. Instead of clinging to old forms, you open to what comes next. Instead of fearing endings, you notice the beginnings they create. You walk with curiosity rather than dread. This curiosity turns uncertainty into exploration, making each moment an invitation to discover rather than a problem to solve. Relationships also transform because much conflict arises from demanding certainty, certainty of love, certainty of agreement, certainty of permanence. Yet love itself is uncertain. As feelings shift, circumstances evolve, and people grow. Joyful surrender does not fear this. It celebrates it. Love becomes deeper when it is not chained to guarantees, and each expression of care becomes precious, precisely because it is not guaranteed to last forever, which brings both gratitude and joy. The practice also reshapes ambition, as many sets rigid goals, convinced their happiness depends on achieving them exactly as planned. But life often interrupts with unexpected turns. Joyful surrender means holding ambition lightly. You still work, still strive, but leave room for surprise, and often the path unfolds in ways more creative than anything you imagined. By releasing the demand for certainty, you allow life to exceed your plan. Even suffering is touched by this perspective, because when pain comes, the mind demands certainty. When will this end? How will I endure? But the truth is no state lasts forever, and pain, like joy, is uncertain. Joyful surrender allows you to rest in this truth, knowing you do not need to know when relief will come, only to trust that change is constant. This trust softens the weight of suffering and creates space for resilience. To cultivate this joy, you begin with small acts of openness. When plans shift, instead of reacting with frustration, pause and ask what possibility hides here. When uncertainty arises, remind yourself this is the nature of life, not a mistake. Each time you practice this, you build a habit of celebration rather than resistance, and over time, it becomes your natural state. Joyful surrender is not about pretending everything is easy, but about seeing that unpredictability is not an interruption of life, but life itself, shifting from fear of the unknown to delight in discovery. This shift does not remove challenges, but it changes how you meet them. Rather than shrinking in dread, you step forward with curiosity. Rather than enduring, you celebrate. To live this way is to feel lighter. The burden of controlling every outcome falls away. The pressure of needing guarantees dissolves, and you begin to walk with openness, ready to meet whatever arises. In this openness, joy appears naturally, not because life is certain, but because it is beautifully uncertain. Letting go was never about giving up. It was about waking up. Through these lessons, we have walked together from the subtle art of non-inference to the freedom of impermanence, from the balance of effort to the patience of karma, from trusting silence to softening the ego, from vulnerability to the playful wisdom of paradise. Along the way, we saw how clinging to control over others only tightens our own chains, and how samsara itself becomes a mirror, revealing the truth of our inner state. We discovered that both words and silence carry power, that uncertainty can be celebrated instead of merely endured, and that trust is not blind, but the deepest alignment with the flow of life itself. The invitation is simple yet profound. Release the grip, trust the unfolding, and allow the universe to carry you with the same grace it carries rivers, stars, and seasons. Now I would love to hear from you. What part of this journey spoke to you most? Which lesson are you ready to practice in your own life? Share your reflections in the comments, because your words might be the reminder someone else needs. And if you found value here, don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell so you can continue walking this path with us. More wisdom, more peace, and more freedom await. Let us keep growing together.